Good evening, everyone. Can everyone hear me? First, before I begin, Happy New Year. Thank you. Welcome to Hammersmith and Fulham's council meeting, including our guests in the audience and those watching on YouTube. I'm Councillor Patricia Quigley, Mayor of the London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham, and I will be chairing tonight's meeting. I would like to be addressed simply as Mayor. This is a hybrid meeting where council will be contributing from home as well as from here in the chamber. Members joining remotely cannot participate or vote on decision reports. To make the meeting more accessible, we will be supported by British Sign Language interpreters. The meeting is being live streamed to YouTube, and by participating, you are consenting to being recorded. I once again welcome our guests in the audience to this meeting. This is the most important civic meeting of the council. To ensure that the meeting runs smoothly, no heckling is allowed or any other type of interruption will be tolerated when people are speaking. This is a personal request. As I am hard of hearing, I need good order to manage the meeting effectively. Councillors, if the whip had not provided me with your name and you wish to speak, please raise your hand and wait until I call you. If you wish to raise a point under standing orders, please raise your hand and I will invite you to speak at a suitable point. When called to speak, please state the standing order you wish to use. Please wait patiently and do not interrupt the person speaking. If you wish to raise a point of order or personal explanation, you may interrupt the councillor speaking. However, please ensure your points are factual, brief, and to the point. Please be patient at the end of each debate or report. I will formally put the recommendations or motion to the vote. For councillors joining on Zoom, please keep your microphone muted unless you are speaking. I would also like to remind members it is customary to stand when speaking if you are able to, so you can be clearly seen and heard. If you are watching at home and would like to follow along with the agenda, there is a link in the description on YouTube. Fire alarm instructions. If the fire alarm sounds, please leave the meeting calmly by the nearest exit, which is through the doors on the right and out the main entrance. Officers will direct you to the assembly point on Black Road. The meeting will be taken as adjourned until it can safely resume business. Toilet can be found through the door at the back of the room on my right. Apology for absence. Darren.
Thank you, Mayor. Apologies for absence have been received from Councillor Anthony's, Jones, Taylor, Siddiq, Kayam, Campbell-Simon, Stanton, Walsh and Morton, and Councillor Rosenberg, Perez and Richardson.
Thank you, Sharon. Item 2, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? No. Item 3, are the minutes of the meeting held on the 1st of November 2023 agreed?
Agreed.
I will now sign. Item 4, Mayor's announcements. The New Year's Honours List. On behalf of the council, I'd like to extend our congratulations to the following people who were recognised in the New Year's Honours List for their outstanding contributions. Louisa Mitchell, who was awarded an MBE for her work with West London Zone. a charity which targets inequality and helps youngsters from disadvantaged backgrounds find paths to success. Vivian Wood, who was awarded a BEM, British Empire Medal, for her service to one of Hammersmith's most treasured community centres, the Grove Neighbourhood Centre. Professor Carol Black, who would made a Dane for a lifetime of public service and her role as independent advisor on combating drugs. Charlie Mackenzie, author of the international bestseller, The Boy, the Mole, the Fox and the Horse, who would made an OBE for services to art and literature, and Chelsea women captain Millie Bright, who was awarded an OBE for services to the Association Football. I'd like to thank them for their hard work and service to the community. I've been informed that the leader of the council, Councillor Stephen Cowan, and the opposition leader, Councillor Rockaban Fowler, would like to say a few words. Leader?
I want to reference all the people who've been awarded by His Majesty the King an honour tonight. We're very fortunate, as has oft been said, to not only have public officials who work hard to make our daily lives better, whether it's within the health service or within the council, within any other public service, but to have those people backed up by a valiant army of quiet heroes who day in, day out work to make our borough a better, kinder, safer and stronger place. It's only right, therefore, that when these people go into this purely for the right reasons of giving a little bit of themselves to make other people have a better quality of life, they never do it in seeking an honour, and they never do it in seeking any form of recognition. But our system counters that, because we notice these people and we nominate them, and it is therefore a great honour for all of us that they have been recognised by His Majesty the King, and it's a chance for us to thank them again for their service to our borough and our country.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Rockaban-Fowler, would you like to say a few words?
Thank you, Mayor. I too, on behalf of the opposition, would like to thank Louisa Mitchell, Vivian Wood, Professor Carol Black, Charlie Mackesy and Millie Bright for their outstanding work, and many congratulations to them on their well-deserved rewards.
Thank you, Councillor Rockaban-Fowler. Public questions. I'd like to thank everyone who took the time to submit questions for tonight's meeting. The public question time is limited to 20 minutes. If a question does not receive a reply in the meeting, a written response will be sent and published in the minutes. For ease of reference, I have provided a copy of your question for you. All the questionnaires called will have an opportunity to ask a brief follow-up question, and please show respect to those asking and answering the questions. I will not allow any interruptions or heckling. I invite Philip Jones to ask a question to Councillor Francis Ume, Cabinet Member for Housing and Homelessness. Please, can you read your question?
In previous correspondence, the council said it does not categorise residential units under the category luxury. I would like to find out how the council measures local demand for affordable social housing, and what safeguards has it put in place to ensure a suitable balance of types of homes have been built between 2010 and 2023. If it doesn't categorise the developments that it authorises to be built through its local planning and housing development plan to ensure local demand for affordable housing has been met, which I believe ought to be its principal duty and responsibility.
Thank you. Do you have I invite the cabinet member to provide a response.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for your question, Mr. Jones. So to understand the local demand for housing, the council produces a strategic housing market assessment. This assessment then analyses local demand and identifies critical needs, particularly for affordable housing, where demand consistently outstrips supply. So the assessment is then used to develop policies in the local plan, which will deliver the different types of housing. The housing mix policy, for example, includes percentages for affordable housing categories within different developments. This means that the council can determine the best mix of housing on individual schemes across the borough based on the size of the scheme, its location, and current priorities, such as housing register needs, decant requirements, specialist housing, larger family-sized affordable homes. And what this does, this dynamic approach essentially means the council can respond to the changing housing needs over the local plan's lifespan. There are sort of different categories of housing, as we know, the market housing, rented or owned at market rates, and affordable housing, which covers a range of elements. So you've got social rent, which is owned and managed by local authorities and registered social landlords, and this rent is set nationally. The affordable rent, similar to social rent, and that's capped at 80% of local market rent, and intermediate housing, which includes shared ownership, intermediate rents, and other options priced above social rent, but below market. So the planning permissions specify the form, type, and tenure of approved housing with an accompanying Section 106 planning obligation to ensure its delivery. And deviations do require that permission to be varied. There are safeguards, including the local plan, the H&F housing strategy, which helps to ensure a balanced housing mix across the borough. So there's also continuous monitoring through annual reports, which allows us to adapt policies and meet housing and affordable targets. The results of the monitoring is published every year in our annual monitoring reports, which are available on the website. More broadly, the administration is also committed to delivering affordable homes in the borough, as evidenced in the manifesto and the council's latest business plan, ensuring that we build more than 3,000 new energy efficient affordable homes, making sure they're built or underway in the next 4 or 5 years. And there are some examples of this where the council is leading the way. For example, Hartop and Lannoy, where we have 134 energy efficient homes, 84% of which will be affordable. Farm Lane and Lily Road, 73 energy efficient homes, 50% affordable. Ed City, where we're delivering 24 affordable homes this month and 108 more affordable homes by autumn next year. And then we're working in partnerships as well to deliver more affordable housing. And I think this diversified approach really helps demonstrate the council's dedication to providing much more affordable homes and helping to build a brighter future for everyone. Does that kind of help answer your question?
No. I want to drill down into the figures.
Do you have a follow-up question?
Yes, I do. I would like to drill down into the figures to know the proportion of the development, particularly in Westfield, that have been luxury developments that have been actually built units. You know, I look at the graph the council's given me, or the figures, and I work out 9,000, 10,000 residential units have been built in the last 10 years, but only 1,700 of those are affordable units. And to me, that's a really low proportion. And it means that the economic upward force on local rents, because a lot of these luxury apartments are being let at £1,000 a week. That pushes up local rents. It means private rents are unaffordable for people like me.
So just to be clear, what is your follow-up question?
Well, that is my fault. You don't break down the figures. You can't tell from your figures. So I'm led to believe that out of 10,000 units that are built in the borough, it tells me how many affordable units, which is 1,780 out of 10,000 units. But because you don't break down the figures, you know, you're saying market rent, and rental, and that doesn't, all I see is lots of luxury flats being built in land that's been, a scarce resource. and not, because you were allowed to actually, or the rules were changed on the proportion of those, being affordable rental properties. That means.
Mr. Jones, the cabinet member has answered your question. And
Well,
we've
can she
only got a
respond
limited
to
time.
Can she respond to what I've said to her?
Yeah, but there's only 2 questions. There's a question and a follow-up question that have been answered. We've only got a set amount of time of 20 minutes.
I thought you said I had 3 questions.
No, it's 2. It's 2. So
That was only one
I
question.
would ask you to please
That was only
move
one
on to allow the
question.
next.
Can I ask one more question?
No, you can't. You've asked your follow-up question. Thank you. I invite Richard Kakanov to ask a question to Councillor Holder, Cabinet Member for Public Realm. Please, can you read your question?
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to ask the question. In relation to the CAN, when will the council release the data from the traffic monitoring camera at the junction of the New Kings Road and Grimston Road? It has been conspicuous by its absence from all council communication in relation to the scheme, including the CAN flyer sent to residents in May 2023. I put 22, that was my error. Much has been made of the 1,000+ drop-in vehicles using the western end of Hurlingham Road, but a large proportion of this reduction is due to traffic having been shifted to Grimston Road and across to Ranelagh Avenue, to the substantial detriment of the residents who live on those 2 streets. This is because vehicles continue to access the Hurlingham Club and the 400 adjacent flats. They just use a different route to get there. As such, the overall decline in the immediate neighbourhood is much smaller than advertised. I've been told that the camera has been vandalised on a number of occasions, but it cannot have been out of action for the entire time since the trial began. And there must therefore be some indication of how traffic flows have changed over the last 14 months. I'm supportive of the CAN aims, but with proper statistics and a transparent approach from the council, we can work constructively on potential solutions, some of which I've already highlighted in the past, to this particular problem.
I invite the cabinet member to provide a response.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you for your question. Can I say I always appreciate the genuine concerns you raise on behalf of your street and neighbouring streets. The trial was designed by residents, and it's important that where residents raise suggestions about how we can improve the scheme, we should do so. You are right that the monitoring camera has been damaged on several occasions. However, we are able to share some data, and I have asked the Director of Climate Change and Transport to send this to you. The Grimston Road camera counts vehicles going northbound and southbound for a typical day. The data I can share with you compares the number of cars before the trial and the number of cars during the trial. The data indicates that the number of cars is broadly similar before and during the trial. Also, the busiest and slowest times of day are much the same now as previously. 2 things have increased though. One is pedestrian activity. People are walking more in the area throughout the whole day. The other is light goods vehicles, around 5 more an hour between 8 AM and 9 PM. We believe this is the result of local deliveries from online shopping accessing your area. I have asked officers to continue to monitor this. We are looking towards releasing some detailed data in a cabinet report before any decision is made on the trial. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have a follow-up question?
I don't. Thank you very much.
I've been informed that questionnaire number 4 cannot attend, so we will move to, question 3. Might help if I could read. So we will move to question 4. I invite David Henderson to ask his question.
Thank you. As a resident in Fulham for more than 35 years, we're not in the habit of complaining about requested developments. And in fact, we generally respect that the council and the planning officers make appropriate decisions. We have, however, submitted complaints to the council for breaches of granted planning permission. For example, the use of roofs as roof terraces, noise from unapproved plan to commercial premises, excuse me, and local residential building works. It is our view that action seems to be rarely taken in response to the apparent breaches, and on occasions, incomplete or no feedback was provided to us. For example, as seen from our own property, roofs used as roof terraces, some without additional changes, which is dangerous in itself, roof structures, others with barriers erected, even doors with exterior glass porches leading onto roofs where there is no planning permission. Commercial buildings with exterior equipment. Actually, the building I'm talking about is a well-known supermarket chain. Those able to meet the planning noise levels were submitted for approval. Those which could never meet the noise requirements were cynically left off the planning drawings, and it seems to have been left with local neighbours to try to push back with the help of your noise officers when the equipment shouldn't have been there in the first place, or at least adequately enclosed in suitable noise abatement housing. Do planning officers routinely carry out post-work checks? And if not, why not? Even if a small percentage was tied in perhaps with the issuance of building reg certificates, that alone would help enforce that planning is adhered to. Whereas it seems to be left to local residents to inform the council of these breaches.
I invite the leader to give a response, please.
I'm giving a response because the cabinet member's not here. So thank you, Mr. Henderson, for your question. It's a very relevant point because what you have is a variety of different types of planning permission coming before a depleted council planning team year in, year out. And here we might have, we've got 3 football clubs, the 3rd highest land prices in Britain. So we have some very big schemes from Olympia and Earls Court to, as you quite rightly say, someone's front loft extension. And so there is certainly an awful lot of strain on the planning department. They do take regular proactive assessments of the work that's been done, but not on every single scheme because we simply don't have the people or resources to do that. So it is often the case that they're relying on some residents to say that's been built and it shouldn't have been built, or to precipitate an investigation. And that's not just relevant to us here in Hammersmith and Fulham, it's how all councils operate across the United Kingdom. It's very hard to institute enforcement actions, but we do it, and we start a series of discussions where we voluntarily try and get the builder or developer to alter the scheme themselves. And often those resources are negotiated, those conclusions are negotiated, and in a few occasions they'll take legal action, but that is, as you quite rightly say, quite rare. So if you have anything in mind, then I will make sure I look at that case for you and find out what buildings it is you're talking about and get you an answer. If you're saying that you have asked questions and not had answers, all I can do is apologize and say I'll look into it. But I would just stress, you know, to give an idea, back in 2010, a long time ago now, the total revenue budget of Hammersmith and Fulham Council was £184 million. Now it's, the year closing was 132 million. And we've had huge inflation in that period. And yet we've had to manage services and try and not let anything slip. And on the whole, if you look, you know, it hasn't. But planning is one of those areas where it's hard to recruit people. The last question are about housing, recruiting planners. A lot of our planners are from different countries where they come and work temporarily here for us. And when we do have them, we have to focus them on priority schemes. And so things can cut through. And if they do, I can apologise. I can only say, if you go to your ward council, we'll pick it up for you and we will endeavour to get it always right, but it may not be that case.
Thank you. I appreciate
You
the
have-
response. Can I just ask,
Do you have
very-
a follow-up
can I
question?
ask a very brief follow-up question,
Thank you.
which is related to planning? In regards to just some reassurance in regards to what is the council view on regarding giving planning permission for extended basement into the garden area, the garden space and garden rooms? And I asked the question because admittedly 5 or 6 years ago, a nearby property was given planning permission to do that. That has completely removed that garden, that Victorian garden forever. I mean, there was plastic grass put on top of the basement and the rest of the garden is now a concrete and brick structure. Is that something that's consistent with the council's view on the environment, on CO2? Is it?
Do you want to follow up? Peter?
Second question. We're very much against plastic grass, by the way. It's very bad for the environment, as you quite rightly say. And actually, to look at the policy on basements across all local governments, it sort of emerged as a common problem across high-value London areas over the last 15 years. And some councils have been seriously damaged by it because lots of people were doing it in order to enhance the value of the building and to profit from it. We've tightened the basement planning rules, and I would like to tighten them more to minimize what you can do. And but what you have to remember about a local authority as a planning authority is we're the first line planning authority. So you have the local authority as first line, then people can appeal. If it's a strategic development, they can appeal to the LGA or even to the Secretary of State. So the final decision doesn't always rest with us. And what we have to do is act within planning law and planning guidelines, which is the London plan and the local plan, as well as national legislation. So it's always a bit difficult to deal with these things, but we have tightened the approach to basements. I would like to stop plastic grass. We're aiming to be the greenest council in the country. There's a whole bunch of measures to make us more so. We're getting noticed for that, but plastic grass just isn't great despite its utility. It's very, very bad for the environment. Whether we can use planning laws to deal with that, we haven't been able to do that so far. So, but I'm always looking, and hopefully, if there's national changes in legislation, we would certainly be lobbying for councils to have greater powers to manage some of these things directly and to limit the rights of appeal.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you for your question.
I invite Liam Downer Sarson to ask a question to Councillor Holder, Cabinet Member for Public Realm. Oh, he's not here, right, okay. I invite Vivian Goldston to ask a question to Councillor. All right, okay. I invite Lauren Clark to ask a question to Councillor Holder, Cabinet Member for Public Realm. Please, can you read your question?
Thank you, Mayor. So at a recent meeting that was brokered by a lead resident who is in favour of the South Fulham Clean Air Neighbourhood Scheme, the council traffic official John Galsworthy told residents and businesses that some votes will count more than others, indicating that in an extensive poll to be carried out borough-wide, votes from residents living inside the South Fulham CAN trial would be favoured. This was also reported in the Sunday Telegraph. And do you think that approach will meet approval standards from Mark Harper, Minister for Transport, as he conducts his review into low traffic neighbourhoods across London?
Thank you very much.
Councillor, can you just hold on a minute, please? Hello, I will allow Councillor Holder to respond, but we're going to run out of time. So if you could respond, please.
Right. We did indeed promise a full and proper consultation. And opinions survey and opinion polling goes beyond the guidance set out by the Secretary of State for Transport. This states in assessing how and in what form to make schemes permanent, authorities should collect appropriate data to build a robust evidence base on which to make a decision. This should include traffic counts, pedestrian and cyclist counts, traffic speed, air quality data, public opinion surveys, and consultation responses. Consultation and community engagement should always be undertaken wherever authorities propose to remove, modify, or reduce existing schemes, and wherever they propose to introduce new ones. Engagement, especially on schemes where there is public controversy, should use objective methods such as professional polling to British Polling Council standards to establish a truly representative picture of local views and to ensure that minority views do not dominate the discourse. Consultations are not referendums. Polling results should be one part of the suite of robust empirical evidence on which decisions are made. The result of the survey and polling, along with traffic and air quality data and hundreds of emails and letters the council has received from residents, businesses and street groups across South Fulham will inform the decision at the end of the Clean Air Neighbourhood Trial. This will be the most comprehensive consultation ever carried out by a local authority in this country. Given that it both meets and exceeds the government's guidance, we would expect this approach to meet government approval.
Thank you.
I will allow a follow-up question,
Oh, wonderful.
but I would appreciate, could you please keep it very brief to the point so the cabinet member can answer, because we've got a very busy
No
schedule.
problem.
Thank you.
Okay, so Councillor Holder, if I'm correct, Hammersmith and Fulham have a mantra of doing things with residents and not to them. So may I ask why you refuse to engage with residents and businesses who are not in favour of the CAN scheme, but regularly speak with the residents who are very pro this scheme?
You wish to respond, Councillor Holder?
Yeah, okay. I mean, I've said it before, but we have in fact engaged quite extensively. And if I'm not mistaken, Lauren, you were at those, certainly at one of the meetings that I've attended myself personally.
Thank you.
Mayor, under Standing Order E12. Mayor, under Standing Order E12, given that I think that there is only one further public questioner here tonight, that Standing Order 12A be suspended and the member of the public who has taken the time to come up here and sit patiently be allowed to ask his question.
Thank you, Councillor Carmel. We'll consult with my officers. Councillor Carmel, I've just been advised that there are 3 more questions to be asked. I need to put this to the vote. So I'm putting it to the vote. So we need to put it to the vote?
Yes.
Those in favour? Please raise your hands. Those against? Those not voting? The motion is lost. Thank you. The allocated time have been used up. This is the end of the public questions. The questions we didn't have time for this evening will receive a written response, which will also be published in the minutes. Committee reports. Item 6, committee reports. Item 6.1, council support scheme 2024-2025. I call upon the cabinet member for finance and reform, Councillor Ree, to to move the report and its recommendation.
Formally moved.
I've been informed that councillors Ree, Murray, Daly and Melton would like to speak on this report. So, Councillor Murray.
Thank you, Mayor, and Happy New Year. To state the obvious, these are extremely difficult economic times. Councils across the country are at risk of bankruptcy. Council leaders are pleading with central government for desperately needed funds. And overall, the outlook looks bleak. No surprise after over a decade of brutal and gratuitous cuts to local authorities. Things are even bleaker for residents up and down the country. The cost of living crisis isn't just a neat political headline, a phrase for journalists to use. It means daily misery in Britain that should have been consigned to history. The fiscal environment for councils is severe at exactly the time when support and services are needed the most. But despite this, there are still options before us, political choices. We could have introduced the minimum payment council tax support scheme, like so many other councils, a scheme which in some places still requires residents to pay up to 50% as a minimum contribution. Instead, we made a political choice. In spite of our budgets being tight, in spite of unjustified cuts in central government funding, we asked ourselves, what will most positively impact residents? What will most directly impact their lives? What sends the clearest message? We're on your side and we mean it. Not a minimum payment, but direct relief. One of only 34 councils to make this choice, impacting 42% of residents. Taking 11% out of paying any council tax at all, the most vulnerable. And ultimately, council tax is a regressive tax. But while we're stuck with it, we're doing everything we can to shield people from having to pay. Study after study has shown the orthodoxy is changing, that the best way to support people experiencing inequality and poverty is direct support, either giving them grants directly or asking them not to pay at all, emancipating the least privileged, at least in some small way, from the structures that hold them back. And we've done all of this at the same time as keeping council tax low for everyone else, both fiscally responsible by keeping your council tax low and committed to the common good by securing and growing frontline services, but also providing direct relief, which is simply the right thing to do. So when people say it's not possible to be economically competent and morally just, show them Hammersmith and Fulham Council. Show them the political choices that we've made. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Daly, you wish to speak?
Thank you, Mayor. Council taxation is a very flawed system for funding local services we rely on. For one, because we're taxed twice. We pay our council tax out of earnings that have already been taxed. And two, because it's regressive. It isn't fair. It is a heavier burden on those with the least. This support scheme begins to mitigate this systemic unfairness. We know government debt pushes people and families into a spiral of poverty and into food and energy banks. Aside from the obvious human cost, helping residents in crisis is an economic cost to local welfare, and it impacts frontline services, in particular, mental health and homelessness services, and it increases the need for social care, particularly in areas where debt collection enforcement is employed. Destitution has more than doubled in the past 5 years. So this council invests in keeping council tax one of the lowest in the country. This support scheme means that 11% of all our lowest income households will pay nothing at all. And our ethical debt collection approach means there aren't debt enforcement agents turning up on doorsteps in our borough. This council is living proof that Labour are the party that makes sound, good economic policies that work.
Councillor Melton, you wish to speak?
Thank you, Mayor. Happy New Year. Benjamin Franklin famously observed that there are few constants in life other than death and taxes. Now, Hammersmith and Fulham Council has yet to uncover the alchemical secrets to immortality, though the youthful vigour of the Cabinet Member for Health might prove otherwise. Our borough has made significant progress on the other constant, becoming a beacon of progressive taxation and social justice. With the cost of living crisis supercharged by the highest inflation rates in decades, as Councillor Meary so ably summarised earlier, our hardworking residents face a stark choice on how to spend tightened family finances. Meanwhile, central government piles on additional costs and burdens onto residents with the highest tax burden in decades. But don't take my word for it. The OECD has noted that the average UK tax burden has risen to almost a third of household budgets in 2023. Indeed, no less than a completely non-partisan organisation like the Institute for Fiscal Studies and indeed the Taxpayers Alliance have warned that the UK tax burden has risen to the highest levels since the Second World War. We all know that taxes fall unequally across the economy and different segments of the population. Many of the surcharges set in Westminster, such as VAT, fuel and alcohol duty, are flat taxes, falling disproportionately on those with the least ability to pay them. So while the Chancellor flirts with pre-election giveaways, which will only benefit his wealthy friends and donors, paid for by yet another round of public services bled white by 14 years of Tory austerity, Hammersmith and Fulham proves that with fiscal discipline and responsible approach to public finances, another path is possible. We are delivering a progressive approach to taxation without compromising public services, where we ask those with the broadest shoulders to pay their fair share, and we ease the burdens on those least able to pay. As we will see from the next report detailing Hammersmith and Fulham's council tax base, council tax income is forecast to increase, primarily through the wealthiest second homeowners paying more. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the members of the party opposite who are fortunate enough to own second homes for their contributions. Whilst also spotlighting that this is not a question of generosity, but of fairness, with everyone contributing what they can to the essential public services that we all rely upon. On the other side of the equation, Hammersmith and Fulham operates probably the most progressive council tax support scheme anywhere in the country. As we've heard, 42% of the residents receive some level of discount, and the most vulnerable pay nothing at all. Our council tax support scheme lends a helping hand to pensioners and families on the lowest incomes, receiving either a partial or full discount to their council tax. With only 34 councils across the country offering 100% council tax discounts, I am immensely proud that Hammersmith and Fulham is yet again leading the charge to a brighter and fairer future. But we shouldn't forget that all of this has been achieved by continuing to deliver some of the best public services in the country, like free social care for all, the biggest social house building programme the capital has seen in decades, and investment in decarbonisation and the green transition, with the highest proportion of EV chargers to vehicles anywhere in the country. So while Tory cronies were pocketing hundreds of millions through Ponzi scheme COVID contracts, or trying to sell off our residents' homes, or privatising public services to deliver half the service at double cost, we were doing the hard graft. We were balancing the books, making efficiencies where we can and investments where we should, so that we can offer the most progressive council tax support scheme in the country, whilst never compromising essential public services.
Thank you. Councillor, you wish to speak?
No, thank you.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Okay. Are there any other councillors?
Thank you, Mayor. Just one brief point to burst your self-righteous virtue signaling bubble. It will not have escaped anyone's attention that you raised council tax that you describe as regressive by the most amount possible last year. So maybe start with not raising taxes before you start virtue signaling about how much you do to try and correct that.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? Councillor Rees, sorry, I didn't see you.
Thank you very much. It's the hokey cokey of speeches. First I'm out, then I'm back in again. Just wanted to respond to that last point. It may have escaped the deputy leader of the opposition's attention, but the local government financial settlements that we are given are based on the assumption that councils increase their council tax by 2.99% and the social care precept of 2%. It may have escaped his attention that for the last 13 years, we have been in a stagnant economy, which has driven up demand for council services that we have been funding properly. It may have escaped his attention, but we have continued to fund the council tax support scheme despite the funding from central government to pay for it being reduced by 56% in real terms. This is a council committed to progressive taxation, to supporting residents when they need it most, and that is what we are doing.
Are there any other speakers? Is the report and its recommendations agreed?
Agreed.
The recommendations are carried. Item 6.2, the council tax base and collection rate 2024-2025. I call upon Councillor Reid to move the report and its recommendations.
Formally moved.
I've been informed that Councillors Reid and Lang would like to speak on this report. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Mayor. As an administration, we are rightly proud of our record when it comes to council tax. In fact, I would say that there is nowhere better in the country to be a council taxpayer than right here in Hammersmith and Fulham. This administration has cut or frozen council tax 5 times in the last 9 years, reducing the burden on residents who are struggling at this difficult time. They know they have a council that is on their side, funding quality public services while maintaining the 3rd lowest council tax rates in the country. But it's not just about how much tax people pay, but about who pays. As we've heard earlier, council tax is a regressive tax. It takes no account of a resident's ability to pay and is based on property values from over 30 years ago. Somebody in a Band H house, supposedly worth at least 8 times as much as a Band A property, pays just 3 times as much. That is why the council tax support scheme that we have just approved is so important. It makes sure that those least able to pay the least. This administration recognises the difficult experiences of those who have been through the care system and the additional barriers that they face. And that is why we took the decision to exempt care leavers from council tax. Another progressive policy that recognises the burden faced by so many of our residents. But there are other people who deserve to be recognised. People who go above and beyond to improve the lives of those around them. Foster carers. They play an invaluable role in our society, providing safe, loving homes for children. In recognition of this vital work and the debt that we owe them, I am proud to propose as part of this report that under Hammersmith and Fulham Labour, foster carers will no longer pay a penny in council tax. This is a small token of our appreciation for a group Councillor Cowan rightly calls quiet heroes who give a little of themselves to help others. Now I want to turn to a different area, if I may. We face a housing crisis in this country. We were told that if you worked hard and put a little money aside, one day you would be able to buy a home of your own for millions across this country. That what was once a rite of passage is now little more than a pipe dream. There is only one way to get this country out of the housing crisis that it has fallen into. It's not 1% deposits. It's not help to buy schemes that stoke demand and push prices up further. It is simply to build more houses. This report shows that this is exactly what we are doing in Hammersmith and Fulham, with thousands of new properties being built, providing a home for people across this borough. Now, what's more, for those outside with their noses pressed to the window, the sight of empty properties adds insult to injury. Empty homes hollow out our communities. Every home left empty is one customer fewer for local shops, local pubs, local cafes. Those who can afford to buy a property in Hammersmith and Fulham and leave it empty can afford to pay a little more towards the community that they are depriving. That is why we are continuing to apply the premiums for empty homes in the borough. And when the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill allows, we will charge the premium on second homes too. Mayor, tax is not just a way to raise funds. The way that taxes are levied can shape the way that our society works. In Hammersmith and Fulham, we are choosing to protect those least able to pay and ensure the borough remains the bright, bustling place that we all know and love. We believe that a home is more than an asset to own. A community is more than a collection of houses, and a neighbour is more than somebody who just lives next door. Let's keep it that way. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Lang, would you like to speak?
If I may. Mayor, councillors on all sides, residents and council officers, a happy new year. 2024, not only the year of the dragon, I believe, but the year of elections. Over 70 scheduled to take place in the democratic world this year. And in a year when we are bidding to be London's borough of culture, it's great to be here in the Irish Cultural Centre tonight. I wish to just say a few words regarding item 6.2. Mayor, can I fully support Councillor Rowan Ree, his Labour colleagues and all council officers for their hard work and compassionate commitment to setting a fair and equitable council tax charge here in Hammersmith and Fulham. In particular, I want to pick out the new support going to foster carers and special guardianship order households. From the 1st of April, Hammersmith and Fulham Labour Council will provide an exemption for in-house foster carers and special guardians residing in the borough, which equates to 99 Band D equivalents. The cost of this will be fully funded by the council. So Hammersmith and Fulham foster carers will now be exempt from local council tax. Mayor, this is another example of a compassionate Labour council working with and supporting residents to build a kinder and a happier Hammersmith and Fulham. We are all supporting foster carers and their families in their vital and important work. We know the enormous benefit that they bring to our young people and to our communities in this especially challenging cost of living times. Whilst there continues to be the daily chaos at Westminster in the Tory party psychodrama, Councillor Ree, his colleagues and Hammersmith and Fulham officers get on with the important work of looking after our residents and building stronger communities. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. I've been informed that Councillor Carmel wishes to speak.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I wasn't actually intending to speak on this, and I will be very brief. But I have to say that a little history lesson for newer members of the council, maybe in order. It was trumpeted about your record on raising council tax. It may surprise younger members of this council that in the 8 years that we were in charge, we cut council tax 7 years out of 8 and froze it for the 8th year. We never once increased council tax. On a second point, somewhat confused by some of the comments by Councillor Ree, who seems to be advocating private home ownership by saying it's a dream of everyone to put something aside and to own their own homes. And he says that the way to get round this is to build more homes. As I'm sure he's aware, depending on which criteria you use to quantify the statistics, we are either the second or the third most densely populated local authority in the entire country. We have a distinct lack of green spaces for people to do it. And given that we've already heard about this council's lofty ambitions to increase the amount of social housing, if you're also going to increase the opportunity for everybody who puts a little aside every month, as I think was a quote that you said, to be able to buy their own property by building more, where exactly, I want to know, in the borough, do you think that these homes are going to go? Which of our parks do you fancy building on? Because there ain't that many spaces, and I don't want to live in the equivalent of Croydon, where every building is a 40-storey skyscraper. Thank you.
Councillor Smith, you will speak.
Thank you, Mayor. Sorry, I just had to challenge that continued fiction about council tax under the previous administration. For the first 4 years they were in office, it was under a Labour government and there was no austerity. So the challenge wasn't there. For the next 4 years, Eric Pickles, as Secretary of State, paid them a grant to cut council tax. They were paid to do it. Once we came in and Eric Pickles left, the grant was removed and government grants to the council were cut, as we've heard, by 56% in real terms. We weren't bribed to cut council tax. We did it through efficiencies and we haven't cut a single service. On the other hand, when they were in charge, assets were sold off on the cheap. Look at Fulham Town Hall. Services were cut. Look at the disgusting thing they did to passenger transport for disabled children that left parents crying, asking and pleading for help when we came into power, just as the service was cut, which we reversed and fixed. That was how they cut council tax. It was through cutting services and being paid by Eric Pickles. We weren't paid by Eric Pickles and we didn't cut services. In fact, we enhanced them. And despite that, our record under Councillor Ree and his predecessor was the best council tax record in real terms since 2014. And we have the third lowest council tax in the country. And that's because the Labour administration had the best council tax record since 2014. So we'll take no lessons from you on council tax because you left the council's finances in tatters and you left our services in tatters. And I'll close with the biggest single legacy that you would have left us if we hadn't reversed it, which was the deal that you did on the West Kensington and Gibbs Green estate, which wasn't index linked because apparently you hadn't heard of inflation. And if we hadn't undone that and it had unraveled as it would have over the course of 20 years, it would have left this council in bankruptcy, as we've seen a number of Tory councils up and down the country enter bankruptcy. And fortunately, we reversed that, and now the council's finances are in a very sound footing. I heard from the last audit committee that the district auditors were positively effusive about the state of our finances, and that's the record of this administration.
Thank you. Thank you. Before we move on, I need councillors to understand, I am hard of hearing. I am all for fair and robust debate. If you do not like what each other one is saying, please wait until they are finished and I will allow you to speak. I cannot have anybody interrupting a current speaker. I need to be able to hear because I need to be able to make a decision. It's really... Sorry, Councillor Carmel. Okay. I do listen to officers, but it's important. It is important. I need to be able to hear what is being said. I am hard of hearing. I am a disabled woman. So please, this is a reasonable adjustment I am asking for. It's not unfair. It's not unreasonable. I will call you when you put your hand up if you have something to say, but please do not heckle or interrupt a speaker. Thank you. Now, are there other speakers on this report? No. Is the report and its recommendations agreed? Thank you. The recommendations are carried. Item 6.3, appointment of the monitoring officer. I call upon the leader of the council, Councillor Cowan, to move the report and its recommendations.
Formally moved.
I've been informed that Councillor Smith would like to speak on this report.
Thank you, Mayor. And just to say, I was completely shocked by the reaction that we heard from the opposite side to your perfectly reasonable request that we behave ourselves. And on behalf of councillors, I apologise that that was said. But I want to say something today about David Tatlaw.
Mayor, under Standing Order 15E, personal explanation. Speaking as a former mayor, I always listen to the advice of officers before taking a decision. And that is what the point was I was making. If you understood it in a different manner, I apologise. But the point I was making is that I always relied on the advice of officers before coming to a decision.
Thank you, Councillor Carmel. I accept your apology, but I just want to make a point myself. I do not need an officer to tell me that I'm hard of hearing. I know this myself. Now, let's move on, and I appreciate your apology. Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to briefly say a word of thanks to David Tatlaw for his time as monitoring officer. He joined us in May 2022 as an interim, but he stayed on for 18 months at the request of the administration, the chief executive, because of the good service he was providing us. David has been a local government legal officer since 1990. We were extremely lucky to get him. He'd been a monitoring officer already in many authorities across the country, most recently in Barnet. And he was a groundbreaking, innovative trendsetter in those roles, and I'm sure will continue to be in the future. For instance, in a previous role, he worked with police to come up with new legal mechanisms that enabled council officers and police officers to work to tackle gangs and to tackle violence against women, something that's now been replicated in other authorities across the country. So beyond sort of the bureaucracy of the council, his impact has been for residents up and down the country in the places he served and even in those he hasn't served. He's wise, he's calm, he's considered, and I know he was greatly valued by the senior management team, senior leadership team, and they're sad to see him go. But one of his legacies is that he I'm sure passed that wisdom and on to Grant, and everyone's delighted to welcome Grant into this new role. So thank you to David, but a very warm welcome to Grant and a congratulations.
Are there any other speakers? Is the report and its recommendations agreed? Grant, congratulations. And may I just say before we move on to the next report, thank you for helping me settle into the role of mayor. Very much appreciated. And to David Tatlaw, thank you. And I wish you every success going forward. Thank you. Right, item 6.4, Councillor calendar of meeting 2024-2025. I call upon the leader, Councillor Cowan, to move the report and its recommendations.
Formally moved.
Is the report and its recommendations agreed?
Agreed.
The recommendations are carried. Special motions. Item 7.1, special motion 1, tackling violent crime. I call on Councillor Dinsmore and Patrick Calberry to move and second.
Formally moved.
Formally seconded.
I call on councillors Dinsmore followed by councillor Patrick Talbari to speak for the opposition.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to begin with some pretty grim statistics. Hammersmith and Fulham is in the top 10 worst boroughs for crime in London. It's 13% higher crime rate in London, and it's 29% higher than in the UK. In London as a whole, knife crime is up 16% from last year under Mayor Khan, including 2 knife attacks within the last few weeks in Bishop's Park in Fulham. The reality is that the public is rightly concerned about violent crime. That is why the Conservative government is taking clear action by employing a record number of police officers in London and introducing further legislation to crack down on knife crime. Sadly, the council will not be able to use either of these tools to keep the public safe, because the law enforcement teams cannot exercise these powers and they won't employ more police. Instead, the administration seeks to boast about the statistics of the law enforcement teams. They claim that there have been 100,000 actions across the borough, but it's not quite clear what that actually means when one has no powers of arrest, inadequate equipment, no ability to enter homes, and no ability to stop and search. The administration claims 5,000 investigations, but again, it's unclear what they mean by that. They've conducted apparently 7,000 weapon sweeps, yet they fail to mention that the efficacy rate is about 1%. That means 99% of sweeps find nothing. And they describe this as action. But it's unsurprising given the LET's limited powers. They boast about 1,700 fixed penalty notices in 2022. We have received the official figures from council officers who say that between April 2022 and April 2023, only 411 were issued. And between April 23 and December 23, only 480 were issued. So what is the administration's figures based on? Are they suggesting that between January and April 2022, they issued almost 1,300 fixed penalty notices? If so, why the dramatic drop in the following 18 months? If the correct figure is more like 900, why do so few investigations result in any action being taken by the LETs? They then go on to say that they've investigated 7,500 instances of fly tipping and waste. Yet when they mentioned 5,000 investigations earlier, they included fly tipping. These numbers are simply all over the place. But then we get to the pièce de résistance, the investigated 100 instances of dog fouling. Well, I'm sure the public will feel much safer learning of these investigations. Taking all of this together, there's approximately 300 actions. So what are the other 78,700? Or perhaps the administration includes patrols as action. Well, there's 2 brief points on that. First, there's limited utility to simply walking around. The public expect law enforcement officials to solve crimes, arrest criminals, and to keep them safe. The administration shouldn't really be boasting about their step count. If they are including patrols in the actions, then the figure comes to 106,300. Yet, when they boast about it, they say there's just under 100,000. So again, the numbers just don't add up and it doesn't make sense. Now, the Conservative group is not against law enforcement teams. The point is that there should be a better blend of both police officers and the law enforcement teams. The council employs extra police officers in its gang unit and is very proud of doing so. What we are suggesting is a better blended approach so that we have more police officers to use the powers that have been given, to be able to enter private properties and seize knives and weapons, to be able to have longer sentencing for those that commit crimes. But they should work, as they do, with the LETs, and it is that blended approach that we will continue to advocate. So once again, I call on the leader of the council to stop politicizing this issue into LETs versus police and have a blended focus of the two. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Talbari, you wish to speak?
Thank you, Mayor. I reserve my right to speak later.
Okay. Can you please hang on? An amendment has been submitted for this motion by email. I call on councillors Harvey and Salusis to move and second the amendment.
Moved.
Formally seconded.
I call on councillor Harvey, followed by councillor Salusis to speak for the administration.
Mayor, just to wish you a happy new year as well. I just really would like to pick up on a point that was just mentioned about having better blended option of a mix of police and let officers and sorting out longer sentencing for those who commit crimes. Maybe the opposition hasn't realised it's not the local council who organises and decides on sentencing guidelines. So it's really bizarre that you would say that. But anyway, I come from a point where I try to imagine that the council is tough on crime. And I think about living in a borough that is so tough on crime that we invest record amounts of money in tackling crime. We have invested 5.5 million in CCTV network. We have the largest law enforcement team in the country. And you can sit there and bring up these silly stats and be judgmental. That's fine, you can do that. But the reality is that our residents really value the law enforcement team. They work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on week, month on month, and even are working at Christmas. And around Christmas time, I actually met one of the law enforcement team. And when I was speaking to him, he told me about how him and a colleague were doing their patrol and they came across a woman who was being sexually assaulted. And if it wasn't for them, that woman could have ended up being seriously more injured than she already was. They intervened and they helped her. That will make a huge difference to that woman's life. So, you know, the law enforcement team are doing amazing work trying to help make our borough safer. And, you know, you sit there and you say and you criticise what we're doing, and you think we should cut the lets and fund the police, and you know that the police get taken from our borough and go over to Westminster. They know that. I've said it before, I'm saying it again. It's like Groundhog Day and you bang on about it and I have to keep repeating myself. You know, the police have to go to Westminster to police the protest. Then we lose them. They're not in the borough. The streets aren't safe. Do you not care? Do you not understand this simple concept? Really, you know, for residents, it is critical to have the Let's team here. And, you know, when you think about our superintendent in the borough, he has said the Let's bring valuable intelligence to the police. They make a valuable contribution to our local community and they are a visible presence. And he welcomes that. So that is our superintendent, along with residents who are saying that they want the Let's team. But it's not just the Let's team that are doing amazing work. We have trading centres, we have the gangs unit. We have a very robust community safety team that are doing huge amounts of work alongside children's services and our youth justice system service. Last year, in 2023, serious youth violence and possession of offensive weapons went down by 3.45% and 4.3% respectively. So go and check your figures. Also, when I think about our gangs unit and our youth justice unit, and I think about how much they're doing mentoring work and empowering programs to help people and deter them away from crime, we've got so much that we are doing alongside Detached Outreach Project with the Harrow Club, Rebel Records, the Round Midnight. We've got huge volumes of programs that are happening in our borough that we are doing to help young people and steer them away from youth crime. Yesterday, I was at a meeting where I felt very privileged to meet some young people who had been involved in the criminal justice system. And they had shared their experiences of what it was like. And one of those young people, through the help of the council, the social workers, and our youth justice system and children's services, had helped move that young person away from a life of crime into a job, and he was working. And that is what we're doing. We're helping to make a difference to people's lives and tackling the crime. So just to conclude, the people that are soft on crime here is the government and the opposition who don't seem to understand how it works. And we are committed to working to make our boroughs safer, and will continue to invest. Thank you. And I would ask people to support the motion.
Councillor Salusa, you wish to speak?
Of course, Mayor. Thank you very much. I seem to be living on the same Groundhog Day as Councillor Harvey. If only there was a way for Councillor Dinsmore, who has all those complaints and all these grievances with the law enforcement teams, if only there was a way for him to raise this with those that run the lets. If only there was a body somewhere, something that meets regularly, maybe once a month or 2-3 months, where he can raise this and he can talk to them. Well, not to surprise you all, but there is such a thing. It meets on the 7th of February, which is about 2 weeks from now. And it's called the Social Inclusion and Community Safety Committee, which I chair. And I'm very glad to have Councillor Dinsmore himself on that committee. And this is the beauty, one of the beauties, for me, one of the best with the law enforcement teams. It's a council service. It is accountable to the residents and through us, or to us and through us to the residents. At these meetings, you can question them, you can influence the service, as we've done time and again, for example, asking them to have a telephone service or to have surgeries for residents, which have been well attended. We've done this, you've been there. This continued failure to appreciate this is just surprising, if not politically driven. Our motion is here to set the record straight. We've had our amendment sets the record straight after a disappointing motion from the Conservatives. But of course, it's hardly a surprise. We've seen time and again that when push comes to shove, they've been soft on crime. And this is another area where they're doing this. And of course, particularly disappointed, but as we said, certainly not surprised about the continued failure to appreciate the work of the Lets, even though they sort of tried to say something positive there in the motion, but in the end, they couldn't really bring themselves to it. And we've seen this in the council chamber, we've seen it at my committee, we've seen it at events across the borough, wherever they get a chance. And indeed, many of the successes of the law enforcement teams are quantifiable. Again, surprise, surprise, 7th of February, you'll see in the report all those statistics with 16,000 FPNs being issued. The number has been updated, and with more than a dozen of knives being found in those patrols. Yes, not every patrol finds knives, but perhaps that is not a bad thing. And with the highest record, I think, from across London, we saw in the highest score in fly tipping. These are all what the Lets have helped do. And we've seen this, well, they may not appreciate it, others do. And indeed, we've seen that. And this is the big difference that maybe Councillor Dinsmore and his colleagues don't appreciate. Not everything is quantifiable, because you cannot quantify, as I mentioned, the fact that we can hold the Lets to account, we can bring them over and we can shape the service. Residents can hold them to account. The reassurance they offer with the patrols. You mentioned the tragic incident at Bishop's Park. The Lets were there, we ramped up the patrols. They were there from the get-go, supporting the police. It's no surprise that, as my colleague, Councillor Harvey mentioned, that the Chief Superintendent, again, and at our committee, has mentioned how grateful he is for the support they receive from the Lets and the intelligence sharing, and how it is very helpful to them that they are working together. And indeed, we've seen other boroughs who are very supportive of the service and want to perhaps introduce it. And even some like Councillor Dinsmore himself, who would have thought, what a plot twist, that in his campaign literature, he has a proud picture himself next to a law enforcement team officer. It's all very confusing and all very surprising, I know. But the Conservatives know fully well why the Lets were brought in, but they try to willfully forget. Councillor Harvey mentioned it. The fundamental reason why that was the case is still there. The years of underfunding from central government have left the Met Police in tatters, and we cannot plug them up by paying for offices that will go into central London. This is not what our residents would want. It's not what this administration wants to spend its money on. We are proud that the law enforcement teams exemplify some of the administration's biggest priorities, being responsive to residents' needs, listening to them, making our streets safer, being tough on crime, and being ruthlessly financially efficient. These have always been top priorities for this administration and will continue to be for as long as necessary, whether they like it or not. Thank you.
Thank you. I've been informed that Councillor Collins, Lang, Coleman and Mercy Ume would also like to speak. I'll call on Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Mayor. Violent crime is not a new thing, but the types, characteristics and schemes are constantly changing. The responses to these shifting crime patterns must also adapt. To that end, it is vital that funding to fight crime needs to be consistent. But such funding is something to which this Tory government is just unable to commit. The cuts to police and other safeguarding services demonstrate that the Conservatives do not see tackling crime as a priority. The spending cuts to numerous services by national government has had a devastating effect on vital services, especially those that deal with crime. Often those affected by crime are the most vulnerable in society. Councils around the country are struggling as a result to protect their communities. H&F Council has not given up on our residents and has taken innovative, effective measures to protect our community despite the cuts by central government. By using intelligent approaches, this Labour-led council has put in place highly modern methods that work within existing infrastructure to continue protecting the community. This Labour council is investing in significant funds towards implementing 24/7 CCTV over the next 5 years. They're also created the country's largest law enforcement team of 72 officers who are in touch with the local area and can respond efficiently to issues as and when they arrive. Investment in the specialist gang unit uses an intelligent approach to safeguarding children and young people, and this in turn protects the community resource that is often too overlooked by government funding. However, H&F Labour prioritises all members of our community. Due to the seriousness and terrible consequences to those affected by violent crime, lawmakers, leaders, national and local councils have a responsibility to meet the challenges of this grave issue and to take action to protect individuals and communities. Acting requires communication between agencies and the capacity to implement cost-effective strategies. Innovative thinking and an ability to employ approaches that consider the changing nature of crime and criminal behaviour is vital. This Labour Council is taking action on crime and prioritises the safety of all residents. I have had feedback from residents who have had issues with crime, and the dedication of the LET officers has quickly and efficiently addressed those issues. Situations of ASB can quickly turn into more serious situations, and having LET officers who can respond rapidly to such matters can help to prevent more damaging outcomes. At a resident meeting last year, I asked a local police if the cost of living crisis had contributed to an increase in criminal behaviour. They replied, definitely. I wonder who caused that. The cost of living crisis was made worse by Tory financial mismanagement, but with the implementation of Labour measures to fight crime, despite the rising crime levels in other areas, violent crime in this Labour borough has gone down in the last 12 months. I know that our Labour colleagues will ensure that this downward trend continues because this Labour-led council puts people first.
Councillor Lang would like to speak.
Thank you. Mayor, at our last full council meeting, we voted and approved our youth justice plan. Can I just remind everyone, the first line reads, in Hammersmith and Fulham, our first priority is to keep people safe and secure. That's the #1 priority of this Labour Council. This Labour group, the Labour Party locally and nationally. Mayor, in 1651, during the English Civil War, Thomas Hobbes wrote Leviathan in English and Latin. Now, perhaps I would not expect UKIP reform politicians and members to have heard of it or even perhaps read it, But I did kind of think that for budding and aspiring Conservative MPs, councillors and members, it was required reading. For in it, Thomas Hobbes says, the first responsibility of government is as a protector, protecting citizens from violence. 14 years of Tory government have seen our public services hollowed out. Last year, we found out from the Home Office that just 1 in 20 crimes were solved by the police. 2.3 million crimes were dropped before a suspect was found. And for sexual offences, the charge rate was just 3.6%, and for rape specifically, just 2.1%. This is a national scandal. And before Christmas, newspapers had headlines saying rapists will go free as judges are told that prisons are full. Now, Mayor, I do have some sympathy in the past with what the Deputy Leader of the Opposition has said about his personal experience regarding violent crime. I have some empathy to that as well, because I too have been a victim outside of the London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham, in my case, unsolved. Disturbing a masked intruder carrying a knife at 3 o'clock in the morning in my mother's bungalow. I still have nightmares about it. But this is very much a national issue, compounded by the continued failings by our National Conservative government. So here in Labour, Hammersmith and Fulham, we've not been complacent, but we've been very proactive. We've introduced more CCTV in the borough. We've targeted the unacceptable violence against women and girls with our dedicated officers and our law enforcement team. Now, not long after I was elected as a Brook Green councillor, I spent a morning with the Let team, seeing them at first hand, giving confidence to the community, engaging with the community, supporting agencies, including the police and welfare, tackling crime, but also addressing people's fear of crime. Because violent crime is down by nearly 4%. Antisocial behaviour is down by a third. And these Let team, they're professional. They're never complacent. They're always looking to improve. And then there's our innovative Gangs, Violence and Exploitation Unit set up in 2020. Now, I'm actually attending next week a conference on this, a national conference, in which you might like to know one of the keynote speakers is the leader of our council, because we are telling the national picture what good work that we are doing and what work we need to improve on. Because back at the end of last year, a major county lines gang was busted and jailed. Some of them were from West London and for all sorts of offences, including abduction of a minor with a view to exploitation. That was a West London boy who went missing for months. I'm led to believe that the number of county lines in this country is about 600. And do you know, over half teenage homicides in the last 3 years had links to gangs. And in 2021, 12,720 children in England were identified as being at risk of being gang exploited by the DfE. So in supporting this amendment, I hope that all councillors in this chamber wishing to protect and support all of our residents in Hammersmith and Fulham will vote for it. For we don't want to see some soft on crime, soft on the causes of crime. Thank you.
Councillor Coleman, you wish to speak?
Just reserve the right, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Ume, you wish to speak?
Thank you, Mayor, and
Would you speak into the mic a bit, please?
thank you, Mayor, and Happy New Year to everyone. Thank you. To me, a good community is a place where people want to live with one another, an environment that is safe and welcoming. I'm speaking on our motion about our LT officers. Last December, the council celebrated our pioneering law enforcement team for their outstanding service and dedication to our residents in Hammersmith and Fulham. Today, we are here in this chamber to extend our heartfelt congratulations to dedicated men and women of law enforcement team for their commitment to upholding justice and ensuring the safety of all those who live and work in our borough. We acknowledge the tireless effort made by our law enforcement team, which contributes significantly to fostering an environment where our residents feel safe and secure as we seek to drive down environmental crime and antisocial behavior. Our residents have told me time and time about the positive impact law enforcement team has within the borough. Our residents have told me about how the team engages with community, whether it was dealing with antisocial behavior or issuing fixed penalty notices or simply saying hello. Last year, our LT officers worked alongside the Met Police to deter drug use on residents' doorstep and patrol areas such as playground in Shepherd's Bush Green to promote deterred a suspected drug dealing. It was our LT of enforcement team that stepped up the patrol in the Green and surrounding areas to make sure that our residents feel safe. Our LT officers have dealt with issues such as fly tipping and refuse accumulation to help take pressure off our PCOs and our police force, a police force that has been let down by our own current government. The government that fails to adequately support law enforcement has left our police force under-resourced, overburdened, resulting in delayed response time and compromising public safety. This government's misleading policy on police and criminal justice have proven disastrous in many, many communities. Sadly, some of people in this room have failed to recognize the amazing impact the law enforcement team has on our community. Our law enforcement team has helped to turn things around in boroughs by supporting vulnerable residents in our community. So I would like to give a big thank you to and congratulations to them for their achievement, commitment, dedication, and engaging with our residents and keeping our community safe and more secure. I hope you support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers on this amendment? Oh, Councillor Dinsmore.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd just like to make 3 brief points. The first is to echo Councillor Ume's comments on the law enforcement team. I'm constantly painted as somebody that is avidly against the law enforcement team, and I'm not. I think they do a good job. The difficulty is they do not have the powers, the training, or the equipment to tackle violent crime. The second point, and coming to Councillor Harvey's point, the reason that the LETs are not drafted in to try and help with protests is because they might turn violent and they don't have the abilities and the training and the powers to deal with that. The answer, therefore, is not to employ those that aren't able to deal with that problem because they won't be nicked. We should have a better blend of law enforcement teams and the police. It does not have to be one or the other, as this council accepts through its gangs unit. The LETs are not equipped to look into gang violence and make the arrests necessary. This council recognizes that and therefore employs more police to deal with it. But why the difference between a gangs unit and violent crime? The LETs themselves say at most they can be a professional witness. They cannot, and it would not be right for them to intervene in a violent crime where somebody was wielding a machete. And this comes to my third point, and to Councillor Sluicas's frankly flippant speech, making jokes about committees that exist to hold the LETs accountable. This is not a laughing matter. I don't know if you've ever experienced somebody wielding a machete in your face, thinking you were going to die, your wife thinking you were going to be beheaded. It's not funny. It's really serious. And when you're in that situation, you call 999 because you need an armed response unit to come. You don't come and call the law enforcement team to come and record it on their body cam. And I find it frankly offensive that you lodge the accusation that I am somehow soft on crime, that actually what I'd like to see is more of what happened to me happening to other people. I've been campaigning constantly since that happened to reform the law and to change that and to stop it. And I come to this from a point of trying to reduce violent crime, not to score political points. And so I reiterate, I congratulate the LETs in the work that they do, in the role that they can do. It is the limit of that role that I criticize, and to say that they cannot therefore be the only answer. And I urge the council once again to consider expanding their employment of the police beyond the gangs unit and into tackling violent crime. Thank you.
Councillor Pakutabari.
Thank you very much, Mayor, and may I wish you and everybody here a Happy New Year as well. My colleague, Councillor Dinsmore, has been forensic as ever in this special motion. It is important to echo him and give credit where credit is due. I enjoy having the LE team around. They're cheerful, they're professional, they're helpful. I'm going to welcome any initiative that makes the area safer. Councillor Harvey in particular spoke movingly on an issue that we can all be thankful for, the presence of an LET. I find it slightly frustrating when people talk about crime without digging down into the various types of illegal behaviour. There are types of activity which are annoying or antisocial, and for those, it's brilliant to have those investigations into fly tipping, to dog fouling. Equally, if you see someone in uniform on the streets, you're much less likely to indulge in that sort of low-level behaviour you know you shouldn't be doing. Residents speak to me all the time, as I'm sure they do across the room, about communities that are scruffy, about behaviour that is antisocial. On the campaign trail, I saw disgraceful streets that positively encourage their users not to care about them. Streets, I'm afraid to say, that have not got any better under Labour. I recognise LETs as an important strand of dealing with that lower level crime, but not necessarily as a silver bullet. There are other types of criminal activity. If I am a hardened criminal, and I know some on that side may think that we Tories are pretty much close to it, one who quite literally lives off crime, I know that the powers of an LET are much the same as those of a private citizen. Would the presence of an LET necessarily have stopped my colleague getting attacked? Would it have stopped the cold-blooded killing outside the White Horse pub in Parsons Green? So it does very little to prevent violent crime. Indeed, if LETs are to be seen as a substitute for the police, it might even be counterproductive. And the reality is, as Councillor Dinsmore has pointed out, our council will not be able to use the additional powers the government has introduced to keep the public safe from violent crime because the LETs cannot exercise these powers. I'd like to tackle head on the idea that there is no money for this. The mayor has found money for a 50% uplift in the cost of his PR, £700,000 on beach parties, the wonderful loophole that if you live with a TfL employee, you have free trips. Now, abolish that loophole and you'd have the cost of about 700 police officers. The government has added an extra 3,666 police officers for London, recognising Labour's failure in this regard. And as so many tragic cases in recent months and years have shown, and as councillors on both sides have spoken about, we do have a violent crime problem. It's a problem that hasn't been helped by the approach of the Labour Mayor of London, nor has it been helped by that narrative, that pervasive narrative from the left that has far long placed too much emphasis on justifying rather than deterring. Do you remember the mayor saying that violent crime was due to the hot weather just after a 7-year-old and a 12-year-old were mown down outside Euston? We've had 1,000 fatal stabbings under Mayor Khan, and he still doesn't get it. Mayor, it is the Conservative approach that is best suited to targeting this violent crime. Expanding legislation, as we have done, expanding police numbers, as we have done, and please, please, don't claim victory when people still feel unsafe leaving their homes. This law enforcement team is a useful addition to tackling that low-level disorder, but it cannot be a case of mission accomplished. And if you ever think it is, just go around all these grim memorials around this wonderful borough, testament to that growing presence of violent crime and to the failed approach that Labour, when in charge, has taken. Thank you.
Are there any other speakers? Councillor Coleman.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, we've had a request to be serious, so let me be serious. Crime destroys lives, so does the fear of crime. It affects working people, it affects communities, it affects local businesses, it damages social cohesion, it damages local economies. Taking 20,000 police out of the police force damages working people, communities, local businesses, damages social cohesion, damages local economies. That's what the Conservative government did, scrabbling now to replace the police force piecemeal after having decimated it. If you get attacked, if you get attacked, or if you suffer violent crime in a borough where policing has been hollowed out, for example, let's take Kensington and Chelsea, where one of the opposition was attacked with a machete. Let's take that. You have to look at the lack of police in Kensington and Chelsea, and you have to wonder why the government chose to take 20,000 police off the street. Now, this Labour administration has tried to do something about it. We have made the largest, as my colleague said, ever investment in tackling crime in this borough's history. And that's because crime is one of the most important and challenging issues of our age. And it is why, therefore, helping people not just in Hammersmith and Fulham, but right across the country, right across Britain, is going to be an absolute priority for a Labour government. Because in the last 13 years, the Conservatives have not just cut the police, they've failed totally to tackle the causes of crime and to tackle violence. They have downgraded the role of prevention. They've hollowed out, as I say, neighbourhood policing. They've undermined criminal justice, the vital institutions that tackle crime and stop criminals. So we have a situation where fewer criminals are being arrested, fewer are being cautioned, fewer are being prosecuted, and virtually everyone I know thinks that criminals are being let off and victims are being let down. 13 years of the Conservative government has brought us to this. Many people have simply given up reporting crime. Councillor Lang talked about rapists going free. It's a shocking thing to hear. And under the Conservatives, on that theme, rates of violence against women and girls have risen to shamefully high levels. This is serious. That's serious. That's what's going on in our country. After 13 years of this government, this sort of serious thing is happening. Rates of violence against women and girls have reached unbelievably high levels. But Mayor, the good news is things don't have to be this way. Now, locally, my colleagues have set out, I think, extremely well all that we're doing to make people in the borough feel safe and supported, with a highly visible law enforcement team working alongside the police, providing more of a neighbourhood police presence, perhaps, than the police themselves, but working alongside them in a team, as the police superintendent here in the borough has said. And nationally, Madam Mayor, Labour has a clear plan to make Britain's streets safe again. So to prevent crime, to punish criminals, to protect people. What will Labour government do? And I would be glad to provide any more detail on this, should you wish, at the pack, if any of you would like further elucidation. They will halve the levels of serious violent crime in a decade by making investments the Conservatives have failed to make. They will bring back neighbourhood policing, 13,000 extra neighbourhood police, more police community support officers. They'll make the grooming and exploitation, criminal exploitation of children, illegal. It isn't illegal now. It will become so under a Labour government. They'll take action, as we're trying to do in this borough, nationally, to stop vulnerable young people being drawn into crime and into gangs. And they'll end the unacceptable waits that victims, and including, and not least, rape victims face for getting justice. And more, if I may, just a little bit more on tackling violence against women and girls. They'll take a whole society approach, not just looking at one thing. So the opposition here is propping up a government that's soft on crime. And the extraordinary thing is they're all over the place, because I'm told that one of their members has been selected as Conservative parliamentary candidate for Hammersmith and Chiswick. And he doesn't seem, however, to realise that the position he's taking is totally contrary to the Chiswick Conservatives. They are huge cheerleaders for the law enforcement team that Hammersmith and Fulham has. They said, we want a dedicated law enforcement team of the type that's been in operation in Hammersmith in 2021. Conservative councillor John Todd says we need to look at additional measures to keep residents and businesses safe, emulating the success of Hammersmith's law enforcement team. So, Mayor, this Chiswick councillor doesn't say that the numbers don't make sense. He says what we're doing is exemplary. And I just wonder, when the Conservatives from here go asking the Conservatives in Chiswick to knock on the doors from them, whether they'll tell them that they think they're idiots and they fundamentally disagree with them. I'd be surprised. So, Mayor, a Labour government will make this country safer, and I urge you to support the motion.
Time is up. Thank you. Leader, I believe you want to speak.
Sure. There was a time in this chamber when there was total unity across all benches on the fight against crime. Violent crime, every single crime, we were united. And so I am disappointed to hear the mealy-mouthed attack on the law enforcement team. You cannot say, as I can see one of the attackers gesticulating, we support the law enforcement team, but they are not very effective, and therefore we should give some of that money to a different body outside of the council. You can't do both. And I know for a fact that the law enforcement team find it very disturbing to hear their jobs offered up continuously in these ongoing political attacks. Now, I don't know if they've deliberately misunderstood what we're doing or whether it's a genuine misunderstanding. Hearing the comments made earlier about the budget, I think it might be the latter. So we'll spell it out for you. The law enforcement team are community policing that give us the eyes and ears on the streets continuously. In the times I've been receiving reports from them, they have removed drug dealers off Shepherd's Bush Green. They have intervened and stopped violence attacks on people. They have worked with our anti-violence against women and girls team to intervene again and protect women and girls. And they work very closely with our CCTV operation, which we have in conjunction with the police, which is the most comprehensive per square kilometre in the United Kingdom, that feeds also into the intelligence of what is going on. And anyone who knows about crime knows you need intelligence-led policing. It was my initiative that we introduced the gangs unit to tackle violence and exploitation and break up gangs. And the reason why is that's where a lot of the violent crime is coming from. People who wield weapons normally are involved in much wider criminality, and it's often drug-fueled. Taking them out is what every expert in criminology says is the right thing to do. It's why this borough has the largest gangs unit in its history and bigger than anyone else in the surrounding area. Now, we don't have direct control on the police, and the police have got their hands full. Morale is at a record low, and police numbers are at a record low, and we are there to support them. The police's job is to police, and that's why we have a joint gangs unit and a joint CCTV unit. But without those eyes and ears on the streets, without that extra work, it wouldn't work. And you see that in other boroughs like Kensington and Chelsea, and you see it in Chiswick, where the Conservative Party is campaigning to have a law enforcement team in Chiswick. So I think when someone on the opposition benches says we've politicised policing and crime, let me tell you this, it's not us who started doing the politicising. Even when the police arrest somebody, they can wait months, years in some cases, to get seen through the criminal justice system. Now, what type of deterrent is that? If you commit a violent crime and then you are not even punished for it with a prison sentence of any single type. It's not us who've run the country for the last 14 years. So I have a lot of time for the last Conservative speaker, but 14 years and a broken criminal justice system, depleted police force, record crime, county lines gangs wrecking rural communities is no sign of success. So I would simply say what the face of soft on crime looks like, look and stare at these faces and remember them, because that's exactly what they look like. And I would caution you to back the law enforcement officers. They do an extremely difficult job facing down extremely horrible people sometimes, making our streets safer as part of a much wider crime-fighting ecosystem, the most extensive in London, the most extensive and well-funded in this borough's history. And we will always make protecting our residents, as my dear colleague, Councillor Lang said, our #1 priority. Get on board with it. Stop attacking those brave people out policing our streets and stop this mad politicisation of our crime-fighting initiatives.
Thank you.
I now put the amendment to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? Those not voting? The motion, I declare the amendment carried. Are there any other speakers on the amendment motion? And I'll call on Councillor Dinsmore to sum up.
Thank you, Mayor. The first point I'd like to make is that this has been a brilliant, robust debate on policy and a good step change from so many of the other special motions that we've had since I've been elected about things that we cannot control and we don't have the power to change. As a result of this debate, we've really gotten into the role of the LET, the interaction with the police, where the line should be. And I would encourage the council in future to take up our special motions as we put them forward to try to tackle policy. And the final thing I'd say on this, I am not, as I've said before, attacking the LETs, certainly not the people that do it, for whom I have the utmost of respect. I entirely agree that they do a difficult job. They do it well. They do it personably, and they absolutely should and are celebrated. And as I said in my earlier speech, my issue is just that they are confined in their role by the powers that they have and the training that they have, which you concede with your gangs unit. And all I ask with the budget coming up is that you look to expand the role of police alongside the LETs, because as my learned council colleague Pascal Tabori mentioned, there simply are not some crimes that they are able to tackle. And through this debate, I hope that we will reach a better balance of the two. Thank you very much.
Is the amended motion agreed? I now put the amended motion to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? Those not voting? I declare the amended motion carried. Item 7.2, special motion to the Housing Department. I call on councillors Alford and Alpha Khan to move and second.
I second.
I'll call on councillors I'll call on councillor Alford, followed by councillor Alfsakan to speak for the opposition.
Mayor, it's with regret that I'm proposing this motion. The continued state of the housing department remains something that I'm deeply concerned about, and I hope that the whole council shares my concerns. Whilst I accept and pay tribute that steps have been taken, we are still failing and have failed our residents. I worry that we lurch from one problem to another and that not enough thought is given to the problems and the outcomes. This council constantly states that it works with and for residents. Well, this is not always apparent in the housing department. I still have too many cases to mention in all aspects of the housing department, and still there is difficulty in having these matters resolved. It is appalling the length of time it takes to address simple matters. We have and have had failing repair contractors who did not attend, and then when they did, failed to do the work. And sadly, even with the new measures, these works are still taking time to resolve. So residents are still living with a constant state of disrepair, which includes mold and damp. We have residents that should have been decanted years ago, and still nothing has been done. We have residents who are in peril when they're not rehoused and left in jeopardy. As some of the councillors may be aware, the situation was so bad that the Ombudsman were and are making a special investigation. However, the report, which should have been out before Christmas, has been delayed till April, I'm told. And we don't know what they've actually discovered. The sadness is that by delaying this report, the reason they're doing it is because they've got other councils they're investigating. We don't know, and so any action on the repairs and the high level of compensation we are paying will not be addressed swiftly. We're already the worst council for damp and mould, and now we've had an investigation into our repairs and its failures. This hardly enhances the reputation for good governance of the administration. I have been repeatedly assured that things are getting better, which I thought was the mantra of the previous Labour administration. And I do accept that the new director is trying very hard to address problems, but I'm worried that it's too little, too late. I have been informed by officers that they have a recovery plan and they're working hard, which I'm sure they are, but whether this plan will work is another matter. As some councillors may be aware, there is a housing pack on which I sit. However, the housing department only briefed on repairs once last year. There was no discussion on the HRA. Indeed, barely mentioned the January pack last year. This year, we're not getting papers on the HRA, but a slideshow on the night. In order to do proper and effective scrutiny, it's essential to have the information in advance. And one of the other areas which I will raise briefly is the difficulty in the refurbishment and reuse of voids. We have a great many long-term voids which are not in use, and this has a knock-on effect of keeping families in temporary accommodation for far too long. And it is well known and well published that there is a dire shortage of such accommodations. So our failures to deal with the voids compound these problems. I can only end by saying that this administration should be ashamed of our housing departments and should be taking steps to address the still very serious problems.
Yeah.
Councillor Alfsakan, you want to speak?
I reserve my right to speak later.
Thank you. An amendment has been submitted for this motion by email. I will give you a few minutes to read it. I call upon Councillors Francis Ume and Daly to move and second the amendment, please?
Formally moved.
Formally seconded.
I'll call on Councillor Francis May, followed by Councillor Daly to speak for the administration.
Thank you, Mayor. Social housing in the UK is like a lifeline. It offers affordable housing to those who might struggle to find a place to call home. But it's clear this does not resonate for a Conservative government who during 13 years in office have not given social housing the vital attention and investment it deserves. Maintenance budgets for council homes have been slashed, and a 4-year rent reduction policy costs this borough the equivalent of what would be £20 million worth of investment today, which has created a decline in new homes being built and its restricted housing initiatives. And so let's get a bit local here and let's have a bit of a history lesson for long-standing and perhaps new members of the opposition. When the Conservatives were in office here at Hammersmith and Fulham, they also pursued a similar approach of no attention to or investment in adequate housing. Council homes were put up for sale and demolition. Notably, the West Kensington and Gibbs Green estates. Residents and now Councillor Sally Taylor at the time said, they didn't care about us. They didn't care about people. And the failed Earls Court development scheme itself was very poorly financially structured, as we heard earlier this evening, and it would have bankrupted the housing revenue account and the council's finances. Thanks to the tenacity of residents, including Councillor Taylor, and many years of campaigning, together with action taken by this administration, these homes were saved. But sadly, the Conservatives' efforts to underscore their disregard for council housing did not stop there. They also decided to diminish and outsource crucial services such as management and caretaking. And if that wasn't enough, they also signed up to a 10-year seriously underfunded repairs contract, which was deliberately designed to serve a smaller housing stock. This administration recognises the significance of council housing, of having a home, the positive difference it makes for people. For example, people with low incomes, single mothers, single fathers, young families, older people, and key workers. Our commitment is unwavering, and we are dedicated to prioritising residents' needs and well-being. So when this administration took office, we had to clean up the mess created in housing. We got out of the repair contract in 2019, but still face the challenges caused by Brexit, the war in the Ukraine, the pandemic, creating increased costs and fueling shortages in materials and labour, which further strained efforts to revitalise the housing sector. And these challenges still persist today. We know there have been difficulties experienced in the housing repair service, and where those services have fallen short, we have apologised, and we are working to address this. Have you apologised? Have you recognised the difference that the lack of difference you've made? The challenges you have created for residents of this borough through actions you have taken. Have you apologised? We're working towards making sure our residents live in safe and decent homes. And the journey has begun with introducing a new housing leadership team with a revived commitment to resident-centric delivery and a drive to instil this across the housing service. We have a cross-council team, which includes public health to address damp and mould. We've improved how we manage repair operatives, expanding our contractor capacity to tackle the challenges that stem from a historically underinvested stock. And we've also created a new housing hub to improve customer service and increase resident satisfaction. Importantly, we're co-producing the improvements by listening to residents and representatives across housing forums, which is crucial in shaping a repairs and housing service that meets the needs and aspirations of our diverse residents. These efforts have created real change, which has been affirmed by the regulator of social housing's recent review into repairs, complaints, and tenant satisfaction. They've affirmed that the council is now meeting its target for repairs. There's been a significant reduction in damp and mold cases, overall repair satisfaction with the repairs being steady, and ultimately, they've concluded that there is no systemic failing within the service and that consumer standards have not been breached. We continue to work to strengthen the housing service and the stock with an emphasis on cultural change, investment with a record-breaking £600 million worth of investment to improve council homes. We're keeping residents safe with our compliance checks, and we're building new homes. We continue to revitalise our housing offer. And we recognise that there's more to do to ensure that we're meeting the requirements of the new Social Housing Act, which is going to be a fundamental part of our improvement.
Thank you, councillor. Time's up.
Recognise the
Councillor,
improvements the
thank
regulator
you.
has and support the motion. Thank you, Mayor.
Councillor Daly, you speak.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a tale of two cities. In my ward, there is a 21 square metre, 2-room studio flat that rents for £1,875 per month on a 1-year contract. Over in Vienna's Favoriten district, there is a 33 square metre, 1-bedroom flat, which rents for £290 per month with no contract end. Vienna's residents have some of the highest standards of living in the world. 2/3 live in social housing. The income cap for it is so high, 75% of the population qualifies. Safe, suitable and affordable housing is a basic right for all, but not so here. And then the obvious question is, how did we get it so wrong when Vienna got it so right? We were at the starting post at the same time. Both cities built social housing between and after the wars, but then we had a Conservative government. And whilst Vienna bloomed in the 80s and 90s, introducing a fund that reserved land in the city exclusively for social housing, here Conservatives sold off the best and largest at a discount with no plans to ever replace them. In 2006, Vienna was investing in modernising its housing, whilst here in Hammersmith and Fulham, the new incoming Conservative administration complained that we had too much social housing. Their leader argued that social housing should be all but got rid of altogether. He wrote, it was bad for people and for society, and councils couldn't make much money out of it. And then they set about getting rid of it. They called it the Housing Estates Investment Plan. Within a couple of years, any home with 2 or more bedrooms worth £350,000 or more could be auctioned off, along with any 1 bed worth over £220,000 and studios worth over £170,000. But more than this, any property which would cost more than £15,000 to refurbish was targeted for sale. And to push all our social housing over the line, they awarded shoestring maintenance contracts. Materials used to repair our homes were specified as the cheapest available. Obviously, repairs were short-lived. The number and frequency of repairs increased, but the funds available to meet those repairs declined. I see the Conservative members here wringing their hands over the state of our social housing. Yet the proposer of the original motion was the cabinet member that oversaw this slash and burn. That is what she should be ashamed of. Nice laugh. The Conservatives pushed this into private rents, inflating the cost of rents for everyone and increasing the burden on housing benefit. By 2015, the housing benefit cost the national purse reached over £30 billion, much of it filling the pockets of private landlords. But in an attempt to reduce the bill, the Conservative Chancellor did not invest in social housing, nor considered anything as crazy as private rent controls, but instead hit the not-for-profit social housing sector and imposed 4 years of social rent reductions. It drained £17 million from the housing revenue account here in Hammersmith and Fulham. It had an immediate and bitter impact for everyone living in social rent homes across our borough and across the country. Service levels fell everywhere, and waiting times for repairs and maintenance lengthened, particularly here where investment had already been decimated. Meanwhile, over in Vienna, because residents had money to spare and to spend, they spent it locally, day in and day out. The cafes, bars and restaurants flourished, the local economy flourished. There was money to repair and improve. It became a virtuous circle. By the time the Conservatives' social rent reductions ended, it was 2020, the country was out of the European Union, the labour market had shrunk, and we were in a pandemic. Our housing department has faced the longest and most vicious of budget cuts and done so over a considerable length of time. Our residents have suffered, but change is here. And I would like to share how very heartened I have been to hear officers in our housing department speak with optimism. They now see neighbours, not assets, homes, not estates. They have the deepest respect for social housing and all its possibilities. And under Richard Schway's guidance, they are pulling together and turning a corner. And our residents are beginning to see a change. Vienna made housing a priority, and this Labour administration is doing the same. Thank you.
I've been informed that councillors Collins, Mary and Patel also wish to speak on the amendment. Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Mayor. As we know, the terrible management of the economy under the Tory government has had a disastrous effect on many public services. Local councils around the country are struggling to keep these services working. Such services like social housing have often been put in place to help the most vulnerable citizens. So they are the ones who will suffer first when the service is affected by lack of long-term funding. The cost of housing is much higher in London than elsewhere in the UK, so high that millions are left in poverty after they've paid their rent or mortgage, and still more once they've paid the energy bills. The council provides housing and other help as a safety net. This means that everyone can live and work in a way that helps them to provide for themselves, as well as contributing to the larger economy. Just as a struggling swimmer can only stay afloat for so long, many of these services are now truly at breaking point due to inadequate funding. Councils are being forced to make ever tough decisions to make savings. Despite these dire economic circumstances, this Labour-led council has continued with its long-term plan to provide truly affordable homes for residents through a variety of schemes. Homelessness and affordable housing are a particular issue in London due to a combination of factors which include economic, social and political influences. Many of these factors interact, cause even more negative impacts to those in most need. Council housing is one of the most important services provided by the council, but it is a service that has not always been valued by the Tories. In the past, council housing stock has been the subject of managed decline, which has left the current council with a huge backlog of repairs and outstanding upgrades. Such works need regular long-term funding from central government, but this is not forthcoming. Just another example of short-termism and allowing problems to turn into crises before there is any action. This approach by the Tory government creates additional financial and social costs. The homeless have a right to a secure place to live. People are a resource, not a problem. Providing a safe place to live means that a person or family can become more productive, something which benefits the whole community. Residents living in social housing have a need for stability too. My grandparents were part of the generation that rebuilt London after the war. They would not have been able to help with this project if they had not been provided with safe, affordable council housing after their original homes were destroyed. Due to the uniquely expensive nature of living in London, not everyone will be able to afford a home. Regular renters are disadvantaged. Key workers also need secure accommodation. However, it does not mean that those people are to be considered unnecessary and a problem. These people are often providing vital services. The need to value those who cannot afford to buy private homes in social terms is why this Labour-led council prioritises those who may have spent their lives working, paying tax and contributing to their communities, as well as those who need extra help for a variety of different reasons. The council vision explains that we want a council that acts with compassion so the most vulnerable amongst us are looked after. The idea that everyone is part of this community forms an important part of this Labour Council's vision that puts ordinary people at the heart of its philosophy. This approach has a sound purpose in that uniting communities rather than dividing them brings benefits to everyone.
Councillor Mary, you wish to speak?
Thank you. As my colleagues have said, I believe that any discussion on this topic simply has to start with the facts and the history. Councils can't properly invest in building council housing or maintaining council housing without funding from national government. As our colleague Councillor Ree often reminds us, as he should, our budgets have been cut by half since 10 years ago. That brutal level of austerity will obviously have a knock-on effect on all sorts of things, including housing. Despite this, we're still investing into our council housing stock, both its upkeep and its growth. But local authorities can't do the things they want to do without adequate funding from the centre. And who's been in charge in the centre for over a decade? They may say, well, you've been in administration for 10 years. Who's been in government for 14? The structural problems in housing are down to lack of proper funding for local authorities. That responsibility lies at the doorstep of the Conservative government. But let's not just abstract this out. This isn't just the fault of the national Conservatives. What's the record of the local Conservatives the last time they were in charge of the council? They neglected council housing, meaning homes weren't properly maintained and taken care of. And then, most shockingly of all, they actually tried to sell our council housing stock off. The party that has throttled our finances and that literally tried to sell off our council housing is now pointing the finger at us. The Labour Council that literally saved our council housing. The Labour Council that's investing huge sums into repairs and refurbishment. The Labour Council that's building new council housing. If they really cared about housing, they wouldn't have tried to sell off people's homes on the West Kent estate. Our colleague Councillor Taylor knows about that all too well. It was this Labour Council that saved those homes. And now it's this Labour Council left with the responsibility to maintain and improve our council housing and build more, a responsibility we take on with great determination. So the Conservatives' record on housing is truly abysmal. But in particular, we should never accept lectures on housing from this Conservative group, with perhaps the worst record of all. The residents of the West Kent estate certainly wouldn't.
Councillor Patel, you wish to speak?
Mayor, may I extend my sentiments along with the other councillors and wish you and everyone here a happy new year. Mayor, the debate this evening, commenced by the Conservative member for the Munster ward, has begun with a very negative speech. Speech which I think was abusive to this administration and the officers of the council who have worked so hard to maintain the housing stock and deal with the housing problem. We have heard about the report of the Housing Ombudsman and his criticisms. I am not here, Mayor, to defend, to vindicate, or to mitigate any matters which have been raised in that report. But I am here to offer some facts on the subject. The matter of housing disrepair has attracted the attention of previous administrations of this council, including the Conservative Council, which held power between 2006 to 2014. That administration left a mountain of housing issues when they left their term of office. In 2014, Labour administration had to deal with those problems when they attend the seals of office in that year. Believing that the matter was of the urgent attention to be dealt with, knowing the importance of the subject to the tenants and the council and the social tenants, and knowing at first hand of the problems and dealing with this when I was canvassing in the St. Constituent ward during the last election. Measures were therefore adopted to deal with some of the issues. We successfully terminated an underfunded 10-year maintenance contract in 2019. As has been stated by previous speakers, the present unfortunate position has arisen by a perfect storm of shortage of skilled labour, Brexit, events which followed the COVID pandemic, and the brutal cuts made by the central government in housing. I have said at various committee meetings, and I say so now, that one of the reasons and one of the ways in which you can reduce the number of complaints which have been made is to refer those complaints to a neutral third party, such as a mediator, who would process those complaints before they are brought to the attention of the Ombudsman. Moving forward, the council plans to invest over £600 million to radically improve the council homes, increase funding to £30 million annually for repairs, and changes have already been implemented as a consequence. I believe that the matters which have been highlighted by the Housing Ombudsman in his report will be fully addressed in the next few months when the report is when the recommendations and the remedies are stated, and there will be a satisfactory delivery of service which will be maintained in the future, in the same way as other exemplary services this council is proud to deliver. Thank you, Mayor.
Are there any other speakers on the amendment? Oh, Councillor Alf-Sultan.
Good evening, Mayor. The problems plaguing the housing department have reached a critical juncture, demanding urgent action from this administration. The state of housing is a reflection of our commitment to social justice and equality. We cannot turn a blind eye to the issues that have festered for almost a decade now, causing untold suffering and anxiety for the most vulnerable members of our society. We have a moral obligation to ensure that every individual has access to safe, affordable, and dignified housing. It is appalling that some of our residents are forced to endure damp and mold-infested walls. The residents feel and say that this administration doesn't care about them. These conditions can cause detrimental effects on the health and well-being of all, especially young children. Respiratory problems, allergic reactions, increased risk of infections, impaired immune systems, cognitive and developmental effects, sleep disturbances, and the psychological impact of living in an unhealthy environment with unpleasant odors is huge. These conditions not only compromise the physical health and well-being of our residents, but also undermine their sense of security and belonging to this borough. Tenants and leaseholders are feeling ignored and voiceless. They feel and say that this administration doesn't care about them. The administration needs to expedite the resolution of complaints and maintenance issues. The plight of those on the waiting list for social housing has left many in desperate living situations and even homelessness. The number of calls I get from residents who are near homeless or almost homeless or homeless is huge. The inefficiencies within the housing department cannot be overlooked any longer. The administration needs to urgently address the issues of substandard living conditions, lack of transparency, unexplained delays, and inadequate housing supply to create a borough that values the dignity and well-being of every individual. I appreciate Councillor Omei for at least trying to apologize for the administration's failure, but she still stopped short of a proper apology that the administration owes to its residents. Thank you.
And I'll put, oh, sorry, Leader. You speak.
Look, I do think history is an important thing, and people should get it right for all sorts of reasons, not least because the truth matters. As everybody who has been in this chamber for some time will know, that this administration has apologized for the challenges that many residents have faced with damp and mold and housing that is quite frankly substandard at times. And additional to that, this administration is putting in the largest investment in fixing those problems that we've ever seen in history. But I come back on that last speech, which quite frankly was devoid of any factual reference to how we got here. And whilst I appreciate the sentiments might be honest and straightforward, the comments themselves were ignorant and far from straightforward. The fact is that housing across the United Kingdom has been in a terrible state, and it was in a very bad state here. And that state started, when we talk about not caring about council housing tenants, in 2006, when Greg Hands shortly afterwards went on TV and said they wanted to reduce the amount of housing stock and introduced a policy to sell off all the street properties, the nicest council houses on streets, arguing that people shouldn't live in them because they're expensive. And if you're in social housing, you don't have a right to live in them. So they sold a lot of them off. And then once they'd done that, they set about selling, which they denied at the time, but we've seen the plans, we've been in office a long time, every single council estate. And this room used to be packed, the chamber used to be packed with people complaining, terrified that they were selling their homes from underneath them. And we have the same smug expressions that you see on the faces now of indifference and callousness. And that's what went on. And then, because they knew they were selling off the council estates, they signed us in 2013 with a 10-year contract, that deliberately took account, as my colleague Councillor Ume said, that they would have less council houses to look after. And so the planned maintenance of council houses didn't happen on their watch. Now that's ideological. They did not believe in social housing then, and they still, despite they might say something differently, don't believe in it now. Now, I do admire the former cabinet member for housing when in the Conservative administration's genuine, I think, sincerity in genuinely caring about council housing tenants and generally trying to be fair. But you were the cabinet member for housing when some of this was happening. Now, I don't know if you agreed with what your administration was doing or whether you voiced behind closed doors that you were against it, but it happened on your watch. And we've been picking up the pieces ever since. Now, hasn't gone well, everything we've done. We've had some very difficult contractors. It's very difficult getting contractors for anything post-Brexit, post-pandemic, but that is not an excuse. It's still been difficult. And even now we're changing contractors. We've had to go through the management team and make significant changes. But anybody ignorant enough to stand in this chamber and say this administration does not care about council houses does not have a right to say it. Look, put on a blue rosette and campaign for a Conservative administration with your record, then you're either deluded or you're deliberately misrepresenting Conservative policies to the people of Hammersmith and Fulham. This administration cares a lot, which is why we apologise, something you have never done for your record. It's why we apologise for what was going on, why we spent heart-aching hours working through the challenges, why every meeting I have with the chief executive, the top of the list is what are we doing to improve the council housing service. This is an administration that cares, and we have a journey to go on, but we will fix this. And when we get a Labour government and him in Parliament, we won't have someone on telly trying to get rid of council housing. We'll have someone on TV arguing for more and better council housing, because we'll have Ben Coleman as our MP. Thank you.
I do. I
You wish to speak, Councillor Coleman?
I may, that's with your permission.
Okay.
Sorry, my back's just recovering. I just want to close this because I think it's difficult for the opposition because they don't have the benefit that we have in the Labour Party of a very large team of people to go out and speak to people several times a week about how they see the world, what's going on, what their lives are like, what they've been through. They have, and if they did go into South Fulham, as I am frequently, they might have had the good fortune. They might have a good fortune if they'd like to listen to hear what they would have had the good fortune of hearing. They might have had the good fortune of meeting a lady I met relatively recently, and we were chatting away, and she said, I'm very happy with everything, very happy with her home. And she said, you know, the really nice thing about this home is how I got it. And I said, no, what happened? She said, I got it the day after you were elected in 2014. I said, how's that? And she said, well, I was having a lot of trouble. I was in very bad condition. Place was in very bad condition. No one was interested in me. The administration, the officers saying to me, I'm sorry, but every time properties come up, they're getting sold off by the Tories, by the administration then. And I was in really, really dire state. And the day after Labour was elected, because on that day, we said, stop selling off any council homes, stop selling them off to officers. On the day we were elected, we promised to do it, and we did it. It's easy. You make a promise, you keep a promise. And the day that happened, she got a call from the housing officer she'd been dealing with, who was a decent person, and said, good news. Said, Labour has stopped selling off the homes. There are 90 homes we were planning to sell off. Not a single one of them now sold off. Would you like one? And she went and had a look at a few, and she picked this one, and she liked it, and she's still living there. And that is the difference that a Labour council makes. That is the sort of attitude and the sort of caring, thoughtful, understanding of real lives attitude difference that a Labour government will make. And I will be very proud to be part of that. And meanwhile, I will carry on talking with my colleagues, people in South Fulham, and if they are able to educate you a little bit in the few visits you make to there between the station and the pub, it would also be a very positive thing.
I now put the amendment to the vote. Those in favour?
Agreed?
Unanimous then.
The amendment.
I declare the amendment carries.
Yeah, you can say.
Are there any other speakers on the amended motion? Councillor Alford.
I shall be very brief. We hear a lot about history. We keep on hearing the same stories from the administration over and over again. What they forget is what we came into in 2006, the Almo. Now that was an idea of Mr. Blair's, an ill thought out idea, which caused immense problems. We had all the decent homes, another bright idea he had. He thought, and I think people do need new bathrooms and kitchens, but forget insulation, forget mold, forget damp. He didn't want those to be dealt with. We had to deal with those. And as cabinet member, I am proud to say that I set up leaseholder panels because prior administration of Labour, oh, leaseholders don't matter. We'll use them as a cash cow. Well, I set up leaseholder panels where leaseholders could talk to the councillors and to the officers and vent their worries and their fears. And for the first 2 years, and I was only a cabinet member for 2 years, but for those 2 years, what we heard was horrific. And I am proud that I set up those panels where our residents were heard. I also invigorated the tenants panels. I set up the residents improvement panel, the residents involvement panel. So please don't ever say that I didn't care about our residents, because the one thing I gave them was a voice. And I'm deeply proud of it. And I am you keep on going about what we did wrong. Yes, of course, every administration makes mistakes, but we did some good things. And I think you should remember that. And for those of you who are new, we did do some good things. We were the ones who involved the residents, because before that, none of you did.
Brilliant.
Is the amendment motion agreed?
Agreed.
So, I declared, is that one?
Yeah.
Yeah. I declare the amended motion carried. Item 7.3, special motion 3.
Mayor, we're withdrawing this motion since the proposer is absent this evening.
Okay, thank you. Seven point 4, special motion 4, calling on the government to tackle sewage discharges. I call on councillors Rowbottom and Nawalby to move and second.
Formally moved.
Councillor Nawawi? Can somebody second it, please?
Formally second.
Who would that?
Councillor Foreman.
Thank you. I'll call on Councillor Rowbottom to speak for the administration.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, there's something in the water. It's feces. The neglect of essential services by the Conservatives for almost 14 years is leaving key public infrastructure like water, like sewage systems, quite literally bursting at the seams. What do you get if you cross London's Victorian sewage system with growing population numbers in a global capital city with climate change and heavy rainfall? The answer is sewage water flooding up into people's homes through the plumbing, and Thames Water pumping raw sewage into the Thames along 4 sites along Hammersmith and Fulham, right next to where local people live and walk and exercise and relax. And there are 3 main discharge spots kind of along the borough, 4 in fact, totaling hundreds of hours. Most recently, sewage was pumped into the Thames on the 4th of January, right next to Fulham Reach Boat Club. And as a reformed rower myself, I can say it's hard enough to motivate yourself to go rowing in January at the best of times. But this didn't help. And these aren't one-off events. It's now the deliberate default course of action during heavy rainfall. And the issue has been entirely foreseeable and preventable. And the local residents in the ward that I represent in Grove Ward, they have some of the highest rates of flooding in the country. And they have had to, and I've seen the stains on their walls, absolutely grim. They've had to bail out the ground floor and basement floors of their properties as raw sewage literally rises up through their homes. And they've had to live with the stench and stains of this with nowhere else to go. So Thames Water are aware of this. The Conservative government is aware of this, and yet nothing is being done. And so you have to ask how we got here. So the first factor is zero political accountability over an increasingly corrupt system. There's a revolving door of employees between the regulator and the regulated of the water industry. And an investigation by the Observer found that 27 former Ofwat directors, managers and consultants, that's the regulator, are now working in the industry that they help to regulate, and about half are now in senior positions. And Thames Water's chief exec resigned last summer and was replaced by Catherine Ross, who was the previous chief exec of the regulator, Ofwat. And when she was grilled by a parliamentary select committee last year, Ms Ross refused to apologise for signing off on the company that acquired Thames Water, and that's despite them more than tripling debt from 3 billion to 10 billion, while also taking out 3 billion in dividends, which were often higher than the company's profits. So Thames Water is now in almost £15 billion of debt, with 80% of its finances sourced from borrowing, and it's actually forecast to run out of money by April unless there's intervention. So as interest rates go up and up, around half their debt is linked to inflation. And despite this, they have paid out billions of pounds to shareholders by borrowing huge amounts against their assets that used to be publicly owned, while paying themselves a shameful, recently totaled 26 million in bonuses since the last election. And this has been very well summarised, this whole dismal dynamic, by Richard Murphy, who's a professor of accounting at Sheffield University, who said, water companies are simply becoming mechanisms to impose massive interest charges on ordinary people when their job should be to supply water at the lowest possible cost for everyone. And it will be the public who have to foot that bill if the government need to bail out Thames Water. And even the chief executive of their regulator now has been concerned about Thames Water's financial resilience for some time. Thames Water's response to maintain that they have a strong liquidity position with seemingly no intended irony. Where has the Conservative government been in all of this? Perhaps this isn't ringing any alarm bells because critically underfunding public services, deregulation, corruption, zero accountability, and ultimately contempt for the public is their MO. Labour have been very explicit about their plan to crack down on these illegal sewage discharges and brought a motion to the Commons last year proposing mandatory monitoring of all of the outlets, automatic fines for sewage discharges, and for water bosses who routinely and systematically break the rules to be held both professionally and personally accountable, including most recently pressing for them to actually face criminal charges. But despite his residents being personally affected, Greg Hands, the MP for Chelsea and Fulham, for now, voted against this plan. So this is the state of the nation under the Conservatives, who wait out the remainder of their beleaguered term in office while vital public services burst at the seams.
Thank you, Councillor. Time is up. Thank you.
A more
Thank you.
allegory of modern Britain.
I've been informed that Councillor Coleman, Walker Fowler, Holman, Alford, Trey and Althorpe wish to speak.
Reserve the right, Madam Mayor. Mayor.
Thank you.
I'll get it right eventually.
Walker Fowler.
Thank you, Mayor. It's always of interest when the administration writes a motion such as this and uses the first 4 points to state, as Basil Fawlty said, the bleeding obvious. Yes, of course, sewage discharge or the dreadful state of storm overflows is of great concern to any right-minded person. It affects us because of the areas of the Thames in our borough where excess surface water and sewage discharges are made. This has become a major issue because the Bazalgette sewerage system was built in the 19th century for a London population of 4 million, and London's population is well over double that now. This increase was not foreseen in the early, this increase was foreseen in the early 2000s, and this is why the Thames Tideway Tunnel, commonly known as the Super Sewer, was designed. All 16 miles of it will be up and running in 2025, and this will reduce overflows by 95%. I must say I'm flabbergasted that the administration has failed to mention in their motion that this magnificent piece of engineering even exists. On a more micro scale, the council could help further by simply conditioning planning permission for new builds with water butts and so on, using porous tarmac on paths in parks and other council-owned hard standings, for example. Perhaps the administration is not as green as it likes to portray. This motion has been on the list to debate since July, and here we are in January. So, the real reason I believe that you have tabled this motion is firstly to support your opposition colleagues in Parliament, and secondly to attack the Right Honourable Greg Hands yet again. We're beginning to think you hang on his every word, and yet, as I've said previously, you never mention your very own Socialist MP, who was, I gather, sacked last year by your opposition leader. Now, Mayor, I think the Chamber needs to hear what has actually happened so far. Labour MPs tabled a motion in the House of Commons calling on the government to set targets and publish a plan to address storm overflows, introduce monitoring and financial penalties for discharges. Greg Hands MP did not vote against in the debate on the 25th of April 2023. He voted for the motion, and I quote from Hansard, that this House calls on the government to set a target for the reduction of sewage discharges, to provide for financial penalties in relation to sewage discharges and breaches of monitoring requirements, and to carry out an impact assessment of sewage discharges. I want to state very clearly that Greg Hands and the Conservative group regard this as a very important issue. Furthermore, back in August 2022, the government's storm overflows discharge reduction plan was published. It set out stringent targets to protect people and the environment, and this was backed up with up to 56 billion in capital investment. By enacting this, the Conservative government has launched the largest costed, legally binding infrastructure programme in water company history. Furthermore, back in 2010, the new Conservative government inherited from Labour only 7% of storm overflows with monitors. Now, 91% are fitted, and it will be 100% this year. The government is also already consulting on proposals for unlimited fines for water companies which break the rules. And since 2015, more than £142 million has been collected in fines and levies. Monies ploughed back into environmental plans. So, to conclude, 1.6 billion of new infrastructure to improve the quality of water in lakes, rivers and the sea, with 1.1 billion specifically for storm overflows. So Labour's new plan is not new at all, but a good example of sewer politics.
I'll call on Councillor Holman to speak.
Thank you, Mayor, and could I also wish you a happy new year? I'm very pleased to be able to speak on this this issue this evening. It's one that's long overdue, not just because we keep delaying having a debate, but as somebody who has served in Askew Ward and now Conyngham Ward since 2006, I have lost count of the times that I've dealt with casework issues relating to flooding and sewerage matters. And my colleagues and I have taken up over the years so many. It's been a constant battle, attending numerous meetings with residents in Thames Water to find solutions. And I do want to refer to the MP for Hammersmith here, who I have to say has always stood shoulder to shoulder with us on those issues in our ward and certainly in the constituency. You've already heard the shocking statistics about the cost to households for water company shareholder dividends, while Royal Sewage continue to be dumped into our rivers. It's concerning, but sadly not surprising, that some of the properties in Boscombe Road have experienced up to 6 floods between 2004 and 2015. Even councillors and some ex-councillors' properties have not been spared. And some flooding incidents have been as recent as 2021 and 22. At one point, flip valves were considered the solution. Thames Water identified high-risk properties and began to install them. And to some extent, they seemed to help. However, the assessment of where they were needed raised questions. Now, Thames Water claims they're not the answer, and this technology won't be expanded, despite the demand from some of those who missed out at the time. And this raises an issue of inequality between those who have them and those who don't. Private tenants and those without insurance are particularly vulnerable to this situation. While SUD schemes like the one in Melina Road in Conyngham are welcome, they do lower the risk of flooding by diverting rainwater and instead of putting it into roadside gullies, they do end up pushing it into the river, and it's only a small part of the solution. A particular issue for local councillors over the years has been the Acton storm tanks. We receive frequent complaints from local residents about sewerage ponds where residue would cling to the bottom of the tank after heavy storms until there was a manual cleaning implemented. We now have the Tidewell Tunnel project that Councillor Brocklebank-Fowler has mentioned, but this came after a lot of pressure from very many politicians across London, and it's now projected not to finish until 2025. It's 2 years behind time. This has been an ongoing battle for our residents and for us as representatives. It's only gained priority in 2019 when Ofwat began to challenge shareholder dividends and directors' pay in comparison to our deteriorating infrastructure. Thames Water, for instance, paid out 1.823 billion in dividends from 2010 to 2019 alone. This is while slashing investments in wastewater management by over 520 million and cutting 1 billion from overall capital investment, which could have addressed the leakage and the thousands of litres of water that should be treated. The situation is unacceptable. Well NGOs like WaterAid appeal for donations to provide clean water and decent sanitation in developing countries, we, the 5th richest economy in the world, struggle to keep our own waters clean. This is a sad testament to our crumbling infrastructure due to the underinvestment, and water is just one example of this. Conningham residents deserve better than this. Hammersmith and Fulham residents deserve better than this, and the country deserves better than this. Please support this motion. Thank you.
Councillor Orford, do you wish to speak?
Fonso.
I'm sorry, I've got your name.
Fonso.
Oh, I'm so sorry. You wish to speak?
Happy New Year, Mayor, and Happy New Year to everyone else. Mayor, sewage in our rivers is unacceptable, which is why the Conservative government is committed to tackling storm overflows, protecting public health and the environment from discharges. Since 2015, the Environment Agency has conducted 59 prosecutions against water and sewage companies, securing fines of over 150 million. In addition, the government's plan for water sets out a plan to tackle every source of pollution in our waters, delivering more investment, stronger regulation, and tougher enforcement. Mayor, this is the first government to take steps to address storm overflows. In August 2022, the Storm Overflows Discharge Reduction Plan was launched, setting out stringent targets to protect people and the environment, backed by billions in capital investment, which is the largest infrastructure program in water company history. Legally binding through the Environment Act 2021, the plan prioritizes storm overflows that could cause the most harm, while balancing impact on consumer bills. DEFRA will tighten permits issued to water companies for storm overflows and ensure water companies deliver the storm overflows discharge reduction plan's targets. Water companies must increase their network capacity and treat sewage before discharge, while massively reducing all discharges. The Secretary of State for DEFRA recently wrote to water companies asking for further action at pace to tackle sewage discharges as a priority. Mayor, the government, the Environment Agency, and Ofwat are working to increase the accountability of water companies. This includes increasing monitoring the frequency and duration of discharges from approximately 7% in 2010 to 100% oversight over overflows now, meeting the ambitious target set by the government to do so by the end of 2023. This shows that the public that when discharges are happening and helps government and regulators to better hold water companies to account for illegal sewage spills and improve knowledge of overflow operation to identify where improvements can be made. Furthermore, following a consultation on strengthening fines for polluters, ministers tabled legislation to remove the limit of £250,000 that can be imposed for environmental offences. This will mean that penalties can be proportionate to the degree of environmental harm and culpability that can act as a powerful deterrent. This will also offer regulators a quicker method of enforcement than lengthy criminal prosecutions, although I am aware that the most serious cases will continue to be taken through the criminal proceedings. As set out in the plan for water, future environmental fines from water companies will be reinvested into a new water restoration fund. Mayor, the government is clear that the volume of sewage discharge is completely unacceptable. This is the first government in history to take such comprehensive action to tackle storm overflows, driving forward more investment, stronger regulation, and tougher enforcement. Any suggestion that Conservative MPs voted to legalise or allow more sewage to go into our rivers is absolutely not true. Conservative MPs have only ever voted to strengthen requirements on water companies and the government, be it through the Environment Act 2021, to strengthen the rules on pollution from wastewater or in agriculture, or through the Environmental Targets Water Regulations 2023. Thank you.
Councillor Trey, you wish to speak?
Thank you, Mayor, and Happy New Year.
I'm just going to go straight in and follow up on that. There has been a 74% reduction in water quality sampling by the agency, by the Environment Agency, between 2010 and 2023. They may be fining, but you'll find that the water companies are just seeing this as an operating cost, basically. Going back to my actual speech, these water companies are breaking the law and they are being held accountable sometimes, but they are still pouring 1.8 million hours of raw sewage in untreated sewage into our rivers last year. Now, what was supposed to be exceptional circumstances has become a flood of sewage. And yet this government have continually declined to force water companies to take all reasonable steps to ensure this sewage is not discharged. 4 times, we've heard that sewage has been, overflowed into Hammersmith alone 4 times, one directly outside Fulham Reach Boat Club. It's not safe to swim in the Thames. It often measures over 4 times the baseline for E. coli, I read. Now, our rivers should come with a health warning. Sewage is not only, though, a danger to us, it's a danger, huge danger, and impact on animals and plants. Sewage reduces biodiversity and damages ecosystems. It poses an existential threat to wildlife. I could go on about algae blooms. There's loads of science behind this. The lack of oxygen in the water causes real problems, particularly to the bacteria. When oxygen is reduced in the water, the invertebrates that rely on the oxygen are damaged by not being able to get the oxygen. And now these invertebrates make up 75% of all animal species. And as the foundation of the food web, invertebrates are food for our wild fish, birds, and mammals. Small, but all sustaining. Without invertebrates, the food web will collapse. Their numbers in the UK have declined by 59% since 1970. More than 125 species of fish and a large number of animals live in and around the river. These include the endangered eel, the European smelt, known to breed near Hammersmith, as well as some seahorses and seals. Now, I do wonder if this Conservative government consider these expendable, you know, just like old and vulnerable people. Anyway, after that vote in 2016, the government decided to only test water quality every 3 years rather than annually, you know, that vote, and will be using its own as yet undisclosed methodology. Chemicals and pesticides banned in the EU since Brexit are not outlawed for use in the UK. This government has also sought to rip up EU-derived sewage pollution rules for house builders. In 2019, the last time the full water assessments took place, just 14% of rivers were in a good ecological health, and none met standards for good chemical health. There's been a 74% reduction in water quality sampling, as I mentioned, and the Environmental Agency is hamstrung in many ways by this government, designed to place economic growth above the environment. Still, in July 2023, Thames Water was fined 3 million, but they just see this as an operating cost. We face a biodiversity crisis with many freshwater species in steep decline. Our systems are interrelated and we are all affected by this disastrous disregard for the health of our rivers. Both government and regulators alike must stop pretending things are better than they are. But it's not just the sewage system that's broken. Britain is broken. We need a general election.
Councillor Output, you wish to speak?
Thank you, Mayor. Water is life's great leveller. Every living thing needs it every single day. From people to plants,
Councillor Orton, I'm so sorry, but please can you wind up your speech as it's now past 10 o'clock? I'm so sorry, Emma.
To conclude.
Next time.
Vote for the motion.
I'm sorry, Emma. Right. Not April Fool's Day. Councillor Rowbottom, do you wish to exercise your right of reply to sum up the debate?
No, I'll reserve that right. Thank you.
Is this motion agreed? No, right, okay. And I'll put the motion to the vote. Those in favour? Those against?
Nobody's left. 8.
Those not voting? I declare the motion carried. Motions 7.5, 7.6 and 7.7 have been withdrawn. And this is the end of tonight's meeting. I'd like to thank everybody for attending or watching. Good night.